Good morning, colleagues, Commissioner Kavanaugh, Commissioner Wright, Gilbert, and others. Hello.
Morning,
Salut, Jean.
Commissioner.
Salut Jean, comment ça va?
Right yesterday.
It was a good day yesterday. Congratulations on all your work, and I think we came to a good conclusion, and I'm so happy that it passed. And it certainly is an important issue. It's like I was telling others, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. You can't unring the bell. That waste is there. The question is, what do we do with it?
That's right.
Good morning, everyone. Just to let you know, the YouTube stream is live.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Melody.
Anyway, I hope you all have a good day, and looking forward to working with you at this transit meeting.
Yeah.
See.
Eric, testing audio.
You're coming in loud and clear, Pat.
Morning, everybody. We'll get started at 9:30. I think we're close to quorum now anyway. Eric, can you confirm, are we a quorum? We can get started?
You do have quorum, Chair.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the March 31st, 2021 special meeting of the Transit Commission. Just to remind the commission and members of the public who will be speaking today, this is a special meeting. That means that we can only discuss the item for which the meeting was called, and that is the update on the COVID-19 service adjustments. The commission will be holding its next meeting in only 3 weeks, at which it will be able to consider regular business. For today's meeting, I've received no regrets. Could the commission coordinator please call the roll call?
Commissioner Brockington. Commissioner Caricato.
I'm here.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner Brockington. Commissioner Caricato.
Present.
Commissioner Gower.
Here.
Commissioner Kavanaugh.
Here.
Commissioner McKinney. Commissioner Olson.
Here.
Commissioner Suds.
Here.
Commissioner Tierney.
Present.
Commissioner Williams.
Here.
Commissioner Wright Gilbert.
Morning.
Vice Chair Cloutier.
Good morning, bonjour.
And Chair Hubley. You have quorum, Chair.
Thank you very much. Before we move on, is there any declarations of interest? Okay, seeing none, we'll now receive the update on COVID-19 service adjustments from Mr. Mckinney and Mr. Scrimger. We do have a number of speakers today, and staff will also be available to answer questions afterwards. Thank you to the residents for joining us today, and public submissions are now closed. So whenever you're ready, Mr. Mckinney.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. Chair, I just, before turning it over to Mr. Scrimger, I just want to bring up a slide to walk through where we've been in the very challenging year that we've had with this worldwide pandemic. You know, I wanted to, there's a lot of information out there that we're all managing, and I wanted to just highlight and walk through the journey that this commission and this council has been through as it pertains to transit. I know and I respect that there was comments out there that we haven't been looking at mitigation measures and saving money and so forth. So I just wanted to bring this to you today in terms of the timelines. So starting off at the beginning of the pandemic, just a reminder that we did reduce service citywide on the bus service. We went 50% immediately, and that was to reserve capacity and resources and make sure that, you know, early days of the pandemic, nobody knew what was going to occur, and obviously our ridership dropped significantly. We have saved millions of dollars through mitigation measures without impacting or leaving any customers behind that needed our service. So immediately in March, and you've heard the city manager and the treasurer talk about cost mitigations, we've closed off the year, and you're going to see in the FEDCO report $12.8 million in operating savings for 2020 and $20.4 million in capital deferrals. Again, that was to balance service, health protection, and also the bottom line, as it is important to all of us. In June, hard to believe, but back then there was talk about a recovery plan. You recall the province issued a 3-stage guideline, and the corporate recovery plan at that time looked at July as the sort of a sunset date as to when things could start to come back to almost normal. Those were earlier days, and things have obviously changed with second wave and different mutations of the virus and so forth. So we brought the recovery plan on transit, and that restored full bus service. And that was a strategic move that was done in partnership with public health, because we wanted to ensure adequate spacing for our customers. The variables were significant in terms of who was returning to work. Restaurants were starting to open up. The summer was a busy time. We knew where school was and so forth. So that was a step in the process. And a lot has happened since June. We then tabled the budget in November. And I want to emphasize this. What you're seeing today is not Plan C. I know there was comments in the media and social media that we're looking at today is not about Plan C. We're not even at Plan B yet. The draft budget that you approved, the council approved, had $30 million in cost reductions, including $8 million in bus service changes. There was $90 million in capital budget adjustments. And then we had Plan A, which said, let's see where we get on funding from other levels of government. Plan B was, we can do further capital adjustments if we need to. And again, we haven't even gone there yet. And Plan C is, if worst case scenario, none of us want to do that, but service cuts are an option. And we would bring that criteria to you, and more on that in a moment. You're going to be hearing from the treasurer that thanks again to other levels of government funding, 2020 we're in a very, very good position. All but the first month of COVID costs were covered. So that's $108.3 million and counting. So that's, we're very good there. And then here we are now in 2021. And I want to take a moment to thank Pat and his team. There's people like Colleen Connolly behind the scenes, planners. They've brought forward to me a plan that does exactly what many of you have talked about, is leave nobody behind that needs the service, look at where the service is not being used, redeploy it to where it's needed, and drive out savings. And this took a lot of time and a lot of thinking. It's again, right up there in some of the best work I've seen in my years in transit. And it results in immediately $5.5 million in savings for 2021. And if things don't pick up in 2022, and I'm going through the calendar for a reason, there's been so many ups and downs, and you'll see in Pat's presentation, we're actually tapped into worldwide trends and metrics and so forth. You have $11 million at your disposal for 2022, which again, doesn't hurt anyone that needs the transit service, because they've looked at where the service is needed, where it's not being used, where there's parallel routes and so forth. So we're taking care of 2020 and we're being proactive for 2022. That's available there. If ridership picks up, we just redeploy the service, so the revenue streams will start to come back. The service criteria is coming to you in April. So that's the report that Chair Hubley talked about. That will be the criteria. We're going to bring that to you in April so that you have a clear lens on what that looks like. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to go through all the steps that we've done to date, and I'll now hand it over to Mr. Scrimger.
Thanks, John. So thank you again, John and Mr. Chair. I'll now take you through the presentation. It matches almost exactly what's in the report, and there's more details in the report than I'll go through today. Next slide, please. So to recap in a slightly different way, John was talking mostly about the financial decisions that were made. This is mostly about the service adjustments that have been made over the last year. In March, we, at the very beginning of the pandemic, or when the pandemic first came to Ottawa, service across the entire network was reduced by approximately 50% to hold our operating resources in reserve. In the spring of 2020, we over time added more trips where customers needed them, and we went up to about 60% of our normal service levels. In June, when masks came in, masks became available and masks became mandatory. We returned to the full regular route network. In September last year, the school service came back, and there's been adjustments to that as school needs have changed. Coming up in just a few weeks at April, the April service change, we've got reliability improvements on routes all across the city based on the current auto traffic levels on the roads. Many people have seen the buses are running early right now because traffic is so light. And as of the middle of March, our ridership across the complete system is currently at 27% of where it would normally be. Next slide, please. So this graph, you've seen versions of this before. This is up to date. The thick light blue line shows our composite of the complete system and where we are. And you can see that ridership fell to its lowest point last April and May, grew from that point through the summer, dropped down a bit as there was more public health restrictions from September, down quite a bit more as we went to the lockdown after Christmas, and has been rising up again since then. So the thick blue line is the complete system. The thin blue line is the O train because it, as we've talked about before, it primarily serves downtown office workers and university students who are staying home in greater proportion than the general population. Conventional bus in the gray line, which is higher up, showing that it's above the system average, and paratranspo very closely following, but since September being at a higher fraction of total normal ridership than the conventional bus and train. The next slide shows, and you can see how closely our pattern matches what the experience was all across the world. These data come from the international benchmarking group that we belong to, COMET, the Community of Metros. And you can see here in the yellow line shows the immediate drop, and then a second drop in the Asia Pacific region, and then a gradual increase in ridership, and they're up to about 70% now. Latin America in the blue with the very same drop that we had in March, and then an increase at a higher level than we're experiencing. So they're up to about half of their normal ridership. The purple line being Europe, exactly the same drop in March, a higher increase through the summer of last year, but then a greater drop than we experienced as that next wave came to them, and they're floating along also at 50%. And North America, in the pink line with all across North America, the same drop in March, and then a gradual increase to September, flattening out with a little bit of reduction post-Christmas. So you can see that all across the world, the pattern is the same. The degree is different by continent. North America almost exactly matching the pattern we have. And just to put this in context, there's many transit agencies are members of COMET, and altogether, all the members of COMET make up about 11% of the world's population. So a great part of the world's urban population is represented here. The next slide, please. So as we look ahead from where we are right now, I mentioned that you've heard me say earlier that our ridership started the year at about 18% of normal levels. In January, by the middle of March, we're up to approximately 27%. That's a 50% increase in ridership in 2 months, which is very large. Bus ridership as of mid-March is at 33% of where it would normally be, O-train ridership at 18%, and paratransport ridership at 34%. The public health measures clearly affect ridership because they advise us on what we should do. Should we stay home? Should we go out? Can we go out? And as we've gone from lockdown to the summer, to the next restrictions that came in September, to the lockdown and stay-at-home order from Christmas, then to orange, and then back to red. All of these have pushed ridership levels up and down a little bit. So as we go forward from now, the rate of return of ridership really only depends on one thing, and that is how many people are traveling. And that number depends to a large degree for OC Transpo on the decisions that are made by employers and institutions, especially our biggest destinations for our customers, the federal public service and other office workers, and universities. And the reason those are the most important is because many of the other employers, many of the other destinations, such as service workers, hospital workers, retail workers, have been continuing to work through the whole period. So as we we see how the vaccine rolls out, and see how the public health restrictions change, and see how those decisions by employers and institutions change, it does seem reasonable to think that we will see a gradual return to working and learning on site through the fall, but perhaps not much earlier. The next slide, please. So this report, we're describing to you the service adjustments that are coming into effect in June. We're not talking about removing service. This is talking about service levels primarily and some routes that run parallel to each other. If we were talking about service cuts, we'd be talking about the removal of transit service from an area at all times or at some times of the day or sometimes of the week. That would cause a significant impact on mobility, especially for those who don't have other travel choices. They might not be able to travel at all. So our recommendation, as John and the chair have both mentioned, is that network that be based on a set of principles that would be decided by the Commission and Council and informed by consultation. The next slide, please. And we will be bringing a report about that to the Transit Commission in April, outlining the principles that we'd recommend that you apply if there's a decision to pursue deep service cuts. These service adjustments that we're outlining today maintain mobility across the entire transit system. All parts of the city that have service today will still have service, but what we're doing is calibrating the capacity to match the actual demand, which in some cases is very low. So that will mean a longer wait time for some people, people who've had a more frequent service supported by higher ridership would have a longer waiting time. And for some people, a small number of people, there would be an additional transfer to complete their trip. Next slide, please. There's 5 parts to the report and 5 parts to the presentation today. We're going to describe for you the temporary suspension of a small number of peak period routes, which not only have very low ridership, but also are almost exactly parallel to other services that continue to run. Frequency reductions to match current ridership levels on a range of routes. A few routes to be shortened where parallel service is available and where the parallel service serves more customers. Some service improvements, some improvements to respond to current travel needs to support those parts of the city where ridership has not fallen and to support those customers who are making the trips where ridership has not fallen to the same degree. And the result of that is an overall reduction in operating cost. Service does remain available at all times of the week and in all parts of the urban area, and we continue to follow the council-approved service standards, and there is enough capacity available to continue to accommodate growth. The next slide, please. So now going through the specifics, the temporary suspension of service on some peak period routes. Route 17 coming in from Waterridge to downtown, Route 224 from Beacon Hill to Blair Station, Route 225 from Orleans and Chapel Hill South to Blair Station, Route 233 from Orleans to Blair Station, Route 235 also from Orleans to Blair Station, Route 251 from Bells Corners to Tunney's Pasture, Route 266 coming from Canada North to Tunney's Pasture, Route 275 from Barhaven to Tunney's Pasture, and Route 284 from Manordale to Tunney's Pasture. These services run in rush hours only. They are in every case almost exactly parallel to a route that will continue to run. And for almost all of these customers, a very small change in travel time. For some people, they would have to walk to the sort of the second nearest bus stop. The next slide, please. A longer list of routes on which frequency would be reduced to better match current ridership levels. The connection routes listed there, all of which feed into Blair Station, Herdman Station, and Tunney's Pasture, would be reduced to every 30 minutes. Across the board, the average there is that those routes are now at 14% of their normal ridership levels. In almost every case, carrying a single-digit number of people per trip, and a 30-minute service will be enough to accommodate all of the current ridership. On the rapid routes listed here, 39, 57, 61, 63, 75, 97, 98, Small frequency reductions, for instance, a bus that now runs every 6 minutes go to every 7 or 8 minutes. A bus that goes every 12 minutes to every 15 minutes. The frequent routes listed there, the same. On the rapid and frequent routes, we'd continue to run service no less frequently than every 15 minutes at the core times of the day, as we always do. The local routes listed here would have other frequency reductions. In some cases, that might be going from a 20-minute service to a 30-minute service, or from a 12-minute service to a 15-minute service, those kinds of things. The replacement buses for O Train Line 2, we'd reduce them slightly on, I believe it's on Saturdays. And at the time of the report, we didn't have our final list of individual trips on routes early in the day or late in the day that would be removed where ridership is at or near zero. We've now completed that analysis. There's 10 additional trips across the complete system. One of them is carrying one person a day, and there is an alternative for that person, and the other 9 are carrying 0 customers. The next slide, please. So as I say, most frequent and rapid routes will continue to operate at least every 15 minutes. The only ones that aren't are the ones that aren't at that level yet, or currently. Most connection routes will continue to operate every 30 minutes. The only ones that don't are those that already run less frequently than that, such as those that come in from Cumberland, Richmond, places like that. Most local routes will continue to operate at least every 30 minutes, and the exceptions there are ones that already run less frequently than every 30, or 2 particular routes, 175 and 164, which are called out in the report, where we would actually go to every 60 minutes. The next slide, please. Now we've also got a number of routes that we would shorten up where there is parallel service available. You can see them here. Route 15, the midday service going over to the museum in Gatineau. Route 37 would start and end at Place d'Orléans rather than Blair. Route 40, all the trips that are extended via the transitway, excuse me, during peak periods would start and end at Greenboro. Route 55 would start and end at Westgate Shopping Centre. Route 58 would start and end at Lincoln Fields rather than continuing to Tunney's Pasture. The trips on Route 74 that go across the Vimy Memorial Bridge to Riverview Station would be shortened to end at Nepean Woods Station. Routes 83 and 84 would start and end at Baseline rather than continue to Tunney's Pasture. And Route 179 would be merged into one of the new bus routes. In every case, these routes do not remove service from, these shortenings of routes do not remove service from anybody. They do require an additional transfer for a small number of people. But in every case, the number of people using these parallel services is very small, from an average of 1 person per trip up to as high as an average of 5 people per trip, but nowhere near the normal ridership in pre-pandemic times. Next slide, please. So we also have the opportunity to reallocate some of these resources to other services, either to support particular travel needs that are stronger during the pandemic, or to make some structural improvements to the network, and in a couple of cases to be able to serve new employers, new work locations which are emerging at this time. So Route 11, which now ends at Confederation Square, would be extended across the Mackenzie King Bridge to connect with the Rideau Centre and the University of Ottawa. Route 19, serving Vanier and Overbrook, would be extended through the Train Yards Shopping District to Herdman Station, clearly a very important travel need right now. Route 32 would be extended to Chapel Hill Station to cover off the area that would be replacing the current Route 225. Route 33, going back to full midday service. This actually restores a service reduction that was made 10 years ago in 2011. Ridership and population have grown in that area in the 10 years since. Route 53 revised to operate on Holland rather than Parkdale to provide a more reliable connection to Tunney's Pasture Station. Route 55 extending Sunday service across town to provide more service to the hospitals along Carling Avenue and to do the job that it does the other 6 days of the week of connecting all the hospitals and to each other and to the O train. Route 56 revised to operate on Parkdale to continue to serve the Civic Hospital from Tunney's Pasture, and to a change that is in harmony with the change to Route 53. Route 62 extending more evening service to and from the west part of Canada and to Stittsville, and to add new Saturday and Sunday service to and from Stittsville on that route to a very quickly growing part of the city. The next slide, please. Route 82, a small change there to operate via Majestic to cover off part of the temporarily suspended Route 284. Saturday service increase on Route 88, a route crosstown route on Baseline, where ridership has been strong. Route 98, adding Sunday service on a route. This is in Greenboro, where ridership has been strong and where Sunday service has been historically very infrequent. On Route 99, we'd be extending some trips further west from its current route end at Barrhaven Center over to Citygate at Fallowfield and Strandherd to serve a very major new employment location that's opening over there in the fall. And that's the new Amazon distribution center, which is going to employ up to about 1,000 people and is opening later in the year. So very important for us to support that travel need by our customers. The new Route 110, replacing parts of Route 63 and parts of Route 179, or all of Route 179, and joining up that gap between Canada and Barrhaven. This will allow people from Barrhaven to get to work locations in Canada South and Canada North, people in Canada to get to work locations in Barrhaven, such as the new Amazon location. So this new Route 110 fills a gap that's been there for many years. Route 170, some small route changes at Citygate to come closer to the Amazon work location, but also to take advantage of some roads that have been built in that new area. And Route 294 in the Leitrim area and in Finley Creek, changing to operate north-south through the Finley Creek community on Kelly Farm Drive now that the roads are complete. And this is a route change we've been waiting for many, many years until the roads were completed. So the next slide, please. Here's some maps, just a few to show the extension of Route 19. The black line shows the current route, and the blue line shows the extension over to Herdman through the train yards. So no change for any of the current customers, just an added connection from Vania and Overbrook to the shopping area. The next slide, please. This is the extension to Route 32, south on Mer Bleu, west Brian Coburn and Renault, continue to serve the new area at Willow Aster and the new area along Fern Casey and Renault, and going into Chapel Hill Station. Chapel Hill Stations also continues to be served by Route 34. Next slide, please. This is to show the Sunday extension of Route 55. Currently, it runs on Sundays only on the black section between Elmvale and the hospital complex on Smythe Road. The blue line shows how it would be extended on Main, Catherine, Raymond, Chamberlain, Isabella, across downtown, and Carling over to Westgate Shopping Center. And you can see how it connects many, many hospitals along its entire length. The next slide, please. And here's the new Route 110 running between Fallowfield Station, Citygate, Hazeldean, Eagleson Station, and then up Leggett Road and into Innovation, sustaining the services there into Canada North, providing a new north-south spine through Canada South, and then bridging that really a short geographic gap between the southeast corner of Canada and the northwest corner of Barrhaven, but giving access to the major employment area at Citygate for all of these people. Next slide, please. So the result of all of this is a net saving of approximately 2,170 operating hours per week. That is equivalent to a saving of about $5.5 million in this calendar year, because these changes will come into effect at the end of June, so approximately halfway through the year. When we get to a full year, if the saving is still required in 2022, then we start the year with a saving of $11 million in a full year already in place. Of course, if ridership returns and we're able to restore any of these services, that would always be our preference. There will be a smaller operating workforce, but that's to be achieved by attrition and by people taking other jobs that are opening up. So while there will be no terminations or layoffs, we do expect that by the end of the year, there's approximately 70 fewer staff members who are paid from the operating budget. Next slide, please. So these service changes begin on Sunday, June 20th. Some of them are weekday only, so they would, the changes there are the Friday before, the Monday after. We are currently working on preparing the schedules, getting ready to do the workforce administration, have people sign for their work, and get all the customer information ready. And there will be extensive customer information. We'll get those details out to customers in the weeks leading up to the service change, so they know what the changes are that affect them and what their choices are. We'll also do in-person customer outreach at the key locations at the key times during the days before and just following the service change. And the other thing, as we all mentioned earlier, is the chair, John, and I mentioned, we'll be bringing another report to you at the April meeting, presenting to you what the principles would be in the event that major service cuts are required or are decided by the Commission and Council. So I believe that's the end of my presentation. The next slide. And so, Mr. Chair, any questions as they come, we'll be happy to answer.
Thank you. John, did you want to add anything?
No, Chair, I think Pat's covered everything well. Thank you.
Okay, could you just, I believe Councilor Brockington was looking for some clarification on the first point of your presentation. Would you like to do that now?
Certainly.
Chair, are you asking me or Mr. Manconi?
No, I'm asking Mr. Manconi to clarify on the first point. You had questions on the 50%. So if you want to clarify that before we, if John could clarify that before we go to delegations, I thought that would be helpful.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Certainly, I can give you the short version, and if you want more details, Pat can give you the longer version. But early days of COVID, public health quickly at the corporate level with the city manager and emergency response team said we needed to preserve assets, employees. We didn't know what the spread was going to do, infection rates. So we went to split shifts. So we split the workforce, and basically that cut the service level in half immediately. And so we were rotating people through those shifts. And that's what led to containment in terms of the early days of COVID. And then Pat worked his magic, Councilor. Again, I can give you the long version if you want, here today or offline, but we just started adjusting routes and deploying basically every second trip on high frequency routes and so forth. And so it was a mixed bag of every second route, variation of routes and so forth.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Manconi. I also want to extend my thanks to Pat and to the team for the work done on here, because one of the things that's included in this is the redeployments, which I think is very good news, because it's areas currently not served that we know there's a demand in that area. So I'm thinking that we're going to get new transit customers out of this effort to redeploy some routes. And certainly in talking with Councillor Harder, she feels the same way about the new service to Barrhaven. So I want to highlight that there's also a lot of good news in this report, and I want to thank you for that. So we have 8 pieces of correspondence, I believe, so far. So hopefully everybody's got a copy of those. And now we can move to the speakers list to get some questions. First up is Selma. Go ahead when you're ready, Selma. Thank you for joining us today. You're on mute,
Good
There you go.
morning. Good morning. Thank you for having us, and thank you for all the work the Transit Commission has been doing on this important file. But I know that they mentioned there are no service cuts in this report, but I think the issue in front of us today is much bigger than a service cut or money saving tactics. The issue, as I see it, it boils down to the public trust in the system reliability and resiliency of the public transit system. Pre-pandemic, the system had provided the city of Ottawa with at least $20 million year-over-year increases in revenues. The actual revenues in 2017 were 222 million, 2018 247 million, 2019 267 million. Are we willing to risk any of this revenue source due to a transient situation? And I'm going to talk about this from different aspects. And one of them, the first one I'm going to address, is from an OC Transpo lens. Our bus drivers are our frontline heroes who did not have the choice to work from home. And although they were unhappy with their work conditions prior to the pandemic, they continued to work through the pandemic to ensure the public got to work, schools, shopping, etc. safely. And while the report claims that the service adjustments are through attrition and reassignment, we have to bear in mind the existing preconditions where we had 100 drivers shortage in OC Transpo in 2019, and the system was being underfunded. These reasons led to trip cancellations, delays, and interruptions. And OC Transpo over the past decade has had struggled to maintain trips being on schedule for the 70%, at least 70% of the market. 1 second, please. Sorry. So these have these impact. Sorry, my son is just playing here. So these, in fact, affect our reliability of the system. And between September and December 2019, the buses arrived on schedule only 54% of the time on weekdays, and we had 2.4% cancellation of trips. And we know that high cancellation are usually attributed to trouble recruiting and retaining drivers. And in fact, pre-pandemic, the drivers have been struggling with bad working conditions as a direct result of shortage of drivers. So they had unrealistic schedules, heavy interlining, being asked to work overtime, low recovery period times, and burnout. It would be worthwhile to investigate how these conditions have changed post-pandemic and how these will play out if we were to lose the 70 staff proposed in this report. Will we be prepared to have our heroes walk out on us post-pandemic if we don't really work out to have their conditions improved? You know, just with the 70 cuts that are coming and the already shortage of 100 before the pandemic, we really need to think of this. I'd like you to consider that instead of slashing the much needed services, the city should be considering adding more drivers so to mitigate the overtime spending. The city has been spending 11 million year-over-year increases on overtime. So I'm just talking about transit service here. In 2017, it was $24.7 million in overtime, 2018, 27 million, and 2019, 38.4 million. If we try to mitigate that overtime spending,
1 minute left.
Be able to get some of that saving that you're aiming to achieve. And my second point is from a city planning point, where we are trying to plan our official plans based on transit. We want more people to take active transit and public transit, and we want to have more development and intensification happening in these areas. We need to maintain the public trust in this system. And my last point is with regards to the customers. Those 14%, although they're a high drop from what we used to have, they don't have the choice to take other options. If they did, they wouldn't be taking public transit in the midst of a pandemic. These are our most vulnerable people, and we are in this together. If we want to provide a surety to all of our residents, we have to maintain the service for them and keep it and look for other ways to get these savings. And we also have the federal government committing to more money into transit, so we can look into that.
Okay, thank you, Salma.
Thank
I just want to point out the wait list that you're talking about when we were short drivers. That was during the build up to LRT 1 opening, and we're running parallel services. We're not short, even if we weren't in the middle of pandemic, we were not short drivers once the system began to be running. So we have one question for you here, Councillor Kavanagh.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Salma, and thank you for presenting with such distraction.
Sorry.
Very cute distraction. No, I appreciate you coming out today, in talking about better service. I think that's definitely where we want to go. So, obviously, things are up in the air with COVID, and we don't know what the future is. You're asking for better service for to keep the service that we have, but are you responding today to what has been put before us in terms of the actual routes?
In terms of the actual routes, none of them affect me personally, but I have seen that they have proposed that the customer. Can you give me 1 second, please?
Of course.
It wouldn't work out if I have a rattlesnake instead of me here.
You're doing a great job.
So one of the things is I've noticed that there were cuts of the peak hour services, and these sometimes are important for people who are trying to get their kids from daycare or school or going to work. They may not be hitting somebody who is like me and you, who is not needing this service. But I remember taking transit, and rush hour was my best because I had the option of getting a bus when I may have missed the other. If a bus is delayed, I could still catch another alternative route. And if we're limiting these options, it may jeopardize the ability of these vulnerable people to take the transit. If they have to wait for an hour or a half hour, tomorrow when we get the cold weather again, hopefully not soon, but when we get the snow again and we have interruptions or we have more traffic on the road, how are these going to be affected? People who are using this service are the ones who don't have the choice to work from home. They're the ones who must be on time to their jobs or to school, to tests, to exams. And one of the issues when I was researching this is even the yellow school buses, when they had shortage of drivers in September 2020, one of the solution was, people could bring their kids using the OC Transpo. So if we're going to be slashing OC Transpo as a reliable service, it could put that whole, it's basically the public trust in the service. This is what I am really afraid of. When we're slashing this in the midst of a pandemic, this is what I'm concerned about. I used to take transit up until I went overseas to a developing country. And I was so thrilled when I found the transit station right next to me. And I'm like, yay, I can take the bus here, because I did not want to drive. And my husband said, it is not a reliable service. It was only taken by, frontline workers in that country who did not have the affordability of having a car. And so I never drove in that country, although I had a bus stop just downstairs, right? And when I came back, I am back to driving. Although I took transit for 10 years before that. When I came back, I realized taking transit is going to take me double the time, if not more, to get where I want to get. And I'm sure it's not the same for everyone. Everybody adjusts. But if they have the choice to move away, why would they not? And this
does that answer your question, Councillor Kavanagh?
Thank you very much. And as the liaison on women and gender equity, I think you're an illustration of burdens of working at home right now and getting your job done while looking after your son there. Thank you very much. Appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Salma, for coming out, and again, thank you for that presentation. Next up is Kirsten Pulls.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. This is not my first transit meeting. For years now, with Free Transit Ottawa, I've been advocating to the city for improved and accessible public.
Oh, did we lose her? Eric, do you see her? She totally dropped right off my screen.
Yes, Chair. She's coming back now, I think.
Okay. Thank you.
I got booted out. I'll start again now. So, hi everyone. This is not my first transit meeting. For years now, with Free Transit Ottawa, I've been advocating to the city for improved and accessible public transit. It doesn't seem like it should be a challenging ask, especially for a city that has declared a climate crisis. But instead, it seems to be the same story over and over again, where fares rise, routes are cut, service levels fall.
Sorry, Kirsten, we're talking today just about adjustments. We're not talking about free transit or anything else.
I understand I'm talking about the service reductions.
It's a special meeting, okay?
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
I invite Councilor Meehan and others who took the Transit Week Challenge a few years ago to remember what they experienced. With full service levels at that time, it was an impossible challenge for many of you. Using the service that you ask your citizens to rely on was impossible for just 1 week. Some of you even refused to try. You're not busier, you're not more important than the other citizens of Ottawa, you just currently have the privilege of owning a car and paying for parking. And what I think that shows is that many of you are at best loosely aware of how our transit system works in reality. The budget that you presented with the route adjustments makes things sound very neat, very easy, there will be no harm to anyone. As someone who used to take the route, the 6 and the 7 routes daily, sometimes more than daily, the suggested reduction in frequency of those routes to every 15 minutes actually sounds like a welcome improvement, because at times I've waited 45 minutes for those routes in the past. If a route says 15 minutes between buses, it usually means 20. If it says 30, it means 40, and all of those stack up when you're taking transfers. This is not going to be a reduction of routes from amazing service to okay service, but from dismal service to worse. Ridership on these routes, yes, has been reduced, but not to zero. So people are still going to be impacted by these cuts. Transit isn't a luxury service, and it's really frustrating to see it continually treated as such. And despite this, despite knowing, we've constantly heard these complaints about the poor quality of the service, how it's unreliable, you have experienced it yourself. And despite the lineups of community organizations that are going to come to this meeting today and ask you to keep service at its current levels, the routes are going to be adjusted. And yes, COVID is exceptional, and I understand that, but what's happening today is not. After the community groups and the concerned citizens leave this call, Mr. Mckinney will drive home that the budget demands cuts, and nothing else that was said before that is really going to matter. We're not going to look for other creative revenue sources. We're not going to ensure that people can get to their vaccine appointments reliably. We're not going to worry about how this affects transit ridership in the long run after the transit death spiral. And we're not going to do these things because the interests that are being represented today are not the interests of our community. And so when we look for budget cuts, we look for them in social services and environmental protections. I'm not going to use my full 5 minutes today. I think that given who most of you represent, I'm not optimistic that these comments are going to be considered, but I do want to ensure that councillors are aware that there are community groups paying attention to climate and to equity and to the decisions that are made today and that have been made over the past year. I'm also going to request that I can remain in the call after my speaking time today. I have learned a lot in the past from seeing how the discussion continues after the community groups leave, so I would love to have that opportunity today. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Mckinney, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Kristen, for coming out and staying after you got booted out. I got booted out earlier. I know it's it really is a sign of the times. I do appreciate hearing from you. I think that it is important to hear from people who take transit. I used to. I don't nearly as much anymore. And I'll tell you when it stopped was route optimization. I'm not sure, maybe you're too young to remember, but I used to be able to take a bus and I could catch one of 3 going home, coming back. So I never waited more than like 5-6 minutes. So it was an easy thing to do for me. And I didn't mind, inclement weather, whatever. And with route optimization, what happened was buses were all still there. It was an adjustment, but it was a cut. Because it meant that then if I went out, there was only one bus coming and not, a choice of 2 or 3. And I can tell you, I never took a bus again. I take the train now often because, you know, I can just go out and I know it's coming. But I stopped taking the bus. I started just to walk to work. I'm fortunate to have that that option. So I just want to ask you, like, is that the kind of decision making that you make as somebody who counts on transit? You know, when we say, yeah, it'll come, you know, instead of every 8 minutes, it'll come every 15, or instead of every 15, every 20 or 20, that could be 25. Does that impact how you choose to travel in the city?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that there's two parts to it. And the first is that, as I mentioned, the schedules are not 100% reliable. So when we say it's going to be 20 minutes between buses, it doesn't mean every 20 minutes on the dot a bus shows up. It means sometimes it's 15 and sometimes it's 25 or 30. So it's very hard to plan your day when you're not sure when those buses are going to be coming, and now you know the gaps between them are larger. And the second piece to that is that if I'm preparing, you know, I'm getting ready, I have to leave the house, I'm going to a meeting, I'm going to an appointment, and I miss that one bus, I'm a minute late, it goes past me, I'm now 30 minutes before I can get where I need to go instead of 15, instead of 20. And so trying to make it to, again, people are scheduling vaccine appointments, they're trying to get to COVID testing, they will have to switch to Uber. A lot of them might end up buying a car. And once you buy that car, you're not going back on transit. And so we're talking about these ridership levels coming back, but when we make the service less usable for the people that are still using it, they're going to find alternatives, because it sounds very neat and easy on paper, but when you're using it in reality, the service gets harder and harder to rely on when we're pushing these gaps farther and farther apart between buses coming. So thank you for asking.
Thank you. I agree with you entirely. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Next up is Commissioner Sarah Wright Gilbert.
Hi, Kristen. Thanks so much for joining us today and offering your thoughts. I certainly hear them and I appreciate them. They have not fallen on deaf ears with me. One question I have is, when I was reading through the report, what struck me was the mention that there would be reduced service in the evenings, as well as further, some customers may have to walk further to get to the next bus stop or to get to a bus that could take them to their destination. Do you have any thoughts on any concerns in terms of safety? I'm thinking specifically as a woman, I would be concerned about reduced frequency in the evening and further, you know, having to walk further. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. So I know that I'm someone who's been lucky enough to work from home, but when I do still take transit, it is in the evenings, generally when I'm going to maybe meet up with someone for a walk downtown. And as a woman walking alone at night, especially, you know, there's areas where I'm not really comfortable doing that. And it does tend to stagger whatever issues there are with trying to get to your bus on time. If I know that it's a 1 kilometer walk to try to catch my bus, some people walk faster, some walk slower. I can run to my bus, but some people don't have that option. And so when you're trying to catch that one bus that's coming for the next 20 or 30 minutes, if you have to run 1 kilometer to catch it and you miss it, then now you're standing alone in the dark for 20 or 30 minutes waiting for your next bus. All of these things, like I just want to drive home. They sound neat and reliable on paper, but when you're actually trying to use the system, there are major challenges whenever we reduce service levels. Thank you for your question.
Thanks, Kristen. I absolutely agree with you. And that's what struck me about this report as well, was I have concerns about whether or not a gender and equity lens was applied to it, especially with respect to the distances that people are going to have to walk and having to wait longer for a bus in the evening. I'm thinking about folks who are essential service workers and whatnot who don't have a choice. So thank you very much, Kirsten. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are my questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kristen, for your presentation. Next up is Sam Hirsch.
Hey folks, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Sam. Go ahead when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to first acknowledge that we're on the unceded and unsurrendered Anishinaabe territory of the Algonquin people, and something important to keep in mind whenever we have these discussions, and must recognize their continued exclusion when it comes to conversations happening inside the institution of City Hall. My name is Sam Hirsch, and I am not sure my video is on, sorry about that. And I'm speaking today as a member of Horizon Ottawa, but also as a transit user and a resident of Ottawa. What we see before us today is a proposal to make massive cuts to our transit system. According to the report submitted to this committee, dozens of routes will see reduced service, and 9 in particular will be completely suspended, some reaching low-income neighborhoods, all of them tracing the entire city. And contrary to what the chair of this committee has repeatedly said to the media, we're not only talking about the connection routes, but also a multitude of routes that are not only express buses, routes that range from Barrhaven to Wateridge, Beacon Hill, and beyond. Those affected are not only commuters from the burbs, as Chair Hubley has said on the radio, but they're essential workers and transit-dependent individuals. They say service will return when the pandemic is over, but that is entirely unclear when that will happen. These cuts will not make our transit system more innovative, will not make our system more efficient, and it is certainly not to help riders. And you might know that if you were actually to do some public consultation, of which Mr. Mckinney has already admitted there was none. These cuts aren't adjustments or service changes. These cuts are quite plainly and simply what they sound like. They're cuts. This is austerity. You wouldn't cut the budget of a fire station if there were fewer fires, or cut down on staff at Hydro Ottawa if there were less people using electricity. The same should be true of public transit, because that's what it is, a public service. People will still be riding and needing those routes, regardless if there is high ridership on it or not. The goal of a transit system shouldn't be to turn a profit, and sometimes deficits are warranted. But while we're on the topic of money, let's address that. We know that the city doesn't lack the financial resources. In fact, the city recently announced last week a surplus of $22 million in 2020. The report that announced this went on to say the savings can now be used to help offset any additional unfunded COVID-19 pressures in 2021, like transit, say. The report then says $79.4 million of this total, and I don't know if it's been used yet, but must be used by March 31st, 2021, and any unused funds must be returned. There cannot be any clearer indication that the money to keep our transit system going without massive cuts like these is so obviously there. If you all today continue to support the proposed cuts, you are showing working class Ottawans that their ability to get to their jobs is not a priority for you. And if you were looking for places to cut, let's look at Strandhurst Drive, for example, a road expansion project costing the city $113 million. Surely an extra lane of traffic is not more important than the continued survival of our entire transit system, or shouldn't be anyways. Instead of parading for the supposed necessity of transit cuts, like some of you on this committee have done over this past year, or this past couple months, why don't you do the right thing and advocate for this money that must be used, by the way, to go towards public transit funding? To make matters worse, these service cuts, or service adjustments, as some have been calling it, will come into place on June 18th, which is exactly the time when the Ford government has said the COVID-19 vaccine will become widely publicly available. This misguided move will make it more difficult for people to access the vaccine, most likely having net negative effects on the community at large. We should follow the lead of municipalities like Niagara Region that have actually decided to make transit free for those going to their vaccine appointments, because they recognize more accessible and reliable transit system is key to beating this virus. That is innovation, not service cuts. Finding a real solution to a difficult problem that helps everyone, something the majority on this committee failed to recognize, it seems. And I mean, just looking at the graph with the pandemic ridership levels across Europe, that North America and Latin America that Pat Scrimger was showing, thank you very much, has to make OC Transpo management scratch their heads. What are they doing in Europe, Latin America, and Asia Pacific that we're not? Certainly that should be the question that we're asking. And and something else that Commissioner Gilbert and Mckinney brought up, that hearing councillors emphasize how 10 minutes or a couple of minutes or walking a little further is not a big deal, clearly shows that they don't have to rely on public transit. This committee needs to do the right thing, and at the very least defer these misguided cuts and sit down with residents and transit riders instead of blindly cutting routes because a few councillors said so. Because at the end of the day, it's us, the residents that you serve, and your decisions must begin to reflect that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hirsch. Next up is Nick Grover. Nick Grover, are you?
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead when you're ready, sir.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Here, I'll just turn on my video too. Yeah, so I turned up today because I'm first of all disappointed that we're talking about this instead of a plan to really bring back ridership, but also specifically, I think a lot of the arguments today don't hold up. I mean, we talk about empty buses, but, people are still using this. I mean, it's a public service, so, in that regard, we have to make sure that it's serving them, whether it's 5 or 500 using it. And I think has been echoed already, it's absurd that these are going to start in June. I mean, we're doing pretty well with vaccines in Ottawa, and a lot of people will be vaccinated by then. They're probably going to want to take the bus. So we should make sure they have more options, not less. I get it. The pandemic has put a crunch on funds because it's coming from fares, but the city's not broke. You know, we spend over $100 million to expand one piece of road. And if we wanted to, we could reallocate funds to make sure transit could operate at the same or an improved capacity. A lot of commissioners here are on the Transport Commission and, you know, on council. So this is doable if we wanted to harmonize these budgets. And it would be more in line with the city's stated vision of reducing pollution, encouraging bus ridership above cars. So yeah, I think we should be talking about how we're going to bring back ridership long term. And the transit death spiral is already a concern because of the pandemic. So we shouldn't continue to actively cause it. When people can't rely on a bus route or it's less frequent, they change their lifestyle. They buy a car, they start taking Uber, and it's harder to bring them back, let alone attract new riders. In this sense, cuts are not temporary at all. They have permanent long-term effects. So I think if we want to be serious about improving the transit system long-term, we should be talking about things like, for example, expanding our bus-only lane network. We have a lot of them already. It's an extremely cheap option if we're talking about money, and it improves service dramatically. You paint a few lanes, put up some barriers, and you can cut travel times by 20 to 28%. You're using less fuel, less wear and tear, and the service becomes more attractive to people. And once they can start using the bus, they'll see, hey, maybe I will ditch my car, maybe I'll come on the bus, and we can actually improve ridership. Let alone people in the pandemic who are using the bus, they aren't going to want to crowd there with people, and the less time they spend on the bus, the better. So what I've just said, you know, off the cuff is a better plan than what's before us because it treats transit as a service rather than a cost burden, which I think is a really important distinction. It focuses on expanding ridership rather than slowly letting people gravitate away from transit. There's a big difference between being efficient with money and being cheap. If we cut service rather than improve it, we're just tying our own hands. And we're not even trying to be creative about implementing the goals that we constantly talk about, whether it's climate change or improving bus service. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you very much, Nick, for coming out today. We appreciate that. Next up is Laura Shantz.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, go ahead when you're ready, Laura.
All right, thank you. My name's Laura, and I'm a member of the Ottawa Transit Riders and of Courage Ottawa. I'm here to talk about the proposed service changes and to remind you that there are many people who cannot be here today who will be impacted. In particular, the proposed adjustments will hurt transit-dependent individuals. It sometimes feels like there's a lack of institutional memory, so I'd like to talk about my lived experience as it pertains to the report before us today. I want to take you back to a cost-cutting exercise that took place in 2004. At that time, OC Transpo was directed to propose cuts that would reduce costs without dramatically affecting ridership numbers. Promises were made that riders would still be able to get where they needed to go. And for many of them, particularly for the 9 to 5 peak hour commuters, that was the case. I wasn't one of those workers. I was in my early 20s working odd hour shifts, often in far-flung locations. I took public transit to get to work. Often on my way to shifts that started or ended late at night or early in the morning, I would be the only one or one of the only people on the bus. I certainly didn't have money for a cab and remember the panic that would set in if my shifts went later than expected and the number of options for getting home dwindled. I remember one night working a shift in Bell's Corners, first realizing that the 172 wouldn't pick me up since it was too late. Then realizing that if I couldn't get out of work in the next 30 minutes, the last 118 of the night would pass. Those 30 minutes came and went. I'm not normally someone who's shy or easily intimidated, but the idea of walking toward home alone from Bell's Corners to wherever I could get a bus, which ended up being Bayshore, didn't seem like a wise or appealing choice, especially when I was already tired from working a 10-hour shift. but it's what I had to do. I also remember poring over my transit map and checking schedules on my computer, trying to find a way to work along the south end of the Route 176 when morning weekend service got reduced. In the end, I ended up walking the last few kilometers to where I needed to go. I know some will likely tell me that these times are different now, that route reductions won't have the same effect, or that there are cheaper alternatives to cabs, or that OC Transpo has more late night service than it did in the 2000s, or that finding a safe route or walking is safer now that almost everyone carries a cell phone. While these things might be true in part, none of it matters if you don't have the money for a cell phone, let alone for a ride share, or if the early or late bus trip that you rely on is cut and you're stranded several kilometers from your destination. Back in 2004, my former union local, Steelworkers 9597, made a similar presentation to highlight some of these same realities. It seems like we haven't learned much in the last 17 years. For me, one of the most jarring points is that your report says that some of the early morning and late night trips will be removed, but there's no indication of which trips these are yet. This lack of transparency makes it hard for riders to have confidence in their ability to get around. I urge you to reach out to riders, tell them specifically which routes and trips you're talking about, and let them have their say too. They deserve no less. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Commissioner Wright Gilbert has a question for you.
Hey, Laura, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Just a couple of quick questions. Do you have the option, any other options other than public transit, or is public transit your sole transportation option?
I have a bike, so that's great for, getting around Vanier and the environs around. If I want to go further afield or places where it's simply not really safe to bike in the city, OC Transpo is my only option.
Okay. And with the reduced trips in the evenings and early mornings and further and for some bus stops having to walk further to get to a bus stop that's actually serviced, would that cause you to rethink taking public transit, say in the evening or early morning, if you had the option?
Yeah, if I had an option and I knew that I was going to have to be standing on the side of the road or like walking a long distance, I would. Yeah, I'd try to find, I'd ask somebody for a ride if I could. I would be trying to figure out other ways around it. I'm fortunate now that I don't have the same $8 an hour shift work job. So that's, it's good news for me. But for a lot of people, that is the reality. And frankly, if you're making, $1 above minimum wage, you're going to burn through half your earnings on a shift if you're trying for Uber or something.
Yeah, absolutely. We're trying to increase ridership. We should probably try to make our customers feel safe in the evening and not have to walk further for a bus.
For
Thanks,
sure.
Laura. Those are all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Laura, for coming out. Next up is Carrie Glens Elliott, please.
Good morning. As I said, I'm Carrie Glens Elliott, and I'm also with the Ottawa Transit Riders. I'd like to point out that the Ottawa Transit Riders also submitted an open letter to the Transit Commission. What we'd really like to talk about are the consultations, or actually the rather shocking lack of consultations around this. Around these route cuts. It's frustrating because I think that it was known that this was coming and it's probably been worked on for a while, but public transit is a service and its primary role is to get people from point A to point B. I am a little mystified as to how anybody can figure out how to modify a service without asking riders. You really don't know if a person riding one bus would prefer to ride a different bus if it went a little further or started 15 minutes earlier or went around to a different bus stop without asking people. And I think we have a golden opportunity right here, right now, to actually talk to people who are transit dependent. OC Transpo has focused for a very long time on suburban to downtown commuters, and the pandemic's going to change that a huge amount. Not only has it already changed things, but even moving forward, as many people know, the federal government is talking about moving to a hybrid system. Some public servants who have traditionally commuted by bus may not return to full-time commuting. So we do need to be talking about providing public transit services to everyone else, people who are commuting to grocery stores and commuting to hospitals and commuting to pharmacies and that sort of thing. And as far as I know, the only way to ask riders is to conduct consultations. So what I really ask the Transit Commission is between now and June is to actually conduct meaningful consultations. We have an opportunity to do these online, and this really opens things up to people who would not normally be able to attend in person. We could be talking to people who would otherwise stay home because they've got childcare issues, or because they have it's difficult to get out, or because they live out on the outskirts of the city and find it very difficult to get in to a consultation. We do have a really good opportunity here to actually talk to communities and talk to people who are transit riders about the kind of service they want. And we could ask questions like, would you prefer a longer, slower bus, or would you prefer 2 short buses? I give that example as out here in Vanier. I don't know whether the Vanier teens know that, but the Vanier teens that go to Gloucester High School and Pearson High School, starting sometime in April, are going to lose their number 12 bus, and they're going to have to start taking 2 buses at a time. I think you need to ask people, is this what you want? Is this going to be effective? Is this going to be okay? Theoretically, you could get there just as fast, but some people prefer to take 1 long bus. Anyways, the other thing that I want to talk about is transfer windows very, very briefly. You've already admitted that a lot of these changes are going to make service much slower, much longer. I don't think that people should necessarily have to pay extra for that. So I'd really like you to reconsider extending the transfer window, or changing things, or making day passes a little bit more affordable. So that's the end of my presentation. My real request is that I would like some consultation on these changes. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Councilor Mckinney has a question for you.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Carrie and Laura before you. You've kind of answered my question, but I want to reiterate, because my concerns are with routes like the 6 and 7 that go down Bank, 12, the 80 and the 86 that go down Maryville Road, the 55 that has extended on one side but cut from the west end. And these are the routes that don't just bring people downtown into the city to work every day. And I can appreciate that the connection buses have got parallel routes. I lived in Canada for years and took a number 60 bus, so I understand how they operate, and perhaps they will suffice for now. But it's those routes that take you from your home to the hospital. If you're working there, or if you have to go to visit, whatever, it's those routes that take you from down Maryville Road to get to the pharmacy that you need to get home to your kids, if you're an essential worker, to be able to get to a childcare center to pick up kids on time. From your perspective, because I think you probably talk to more transit riders than any of us do regularly, do you believe that it's those routes that we have to be most concerned with in terms of I know we're calling them adjustments, but when there's less buses running, to me, it's a cut. It is a cut in service. It's a reduction in service. Would you agree that it is the 6, the 7, the 86, the 55, that it's those routes that will most disadvantage riders who absolutely count on public transit in this city?
Yes, actually, I think there's a difference between what you plan theoretically. If everything works just fine, these buses will work just great. But in reality, if you're actually experienced in riding the bus around Ottawa, you know that some buses are more reliable than others. You know that some buses are sometimes overcrowded. You know that some buses get stuck in traffic more often. So those buses that you mentioned in Vanier, the 12, which is the absolute workhorse of the East, it needs to come frequently. It needs to come regularly. There need to be enough buses that it's not overcrowded. What local people do is they might ride different buses around for a short while, but the 12 is the one they rely on to get to where they need to go. And so I can't speak for other communities, but we have chapters in different areas of the city, and everybody has a list of buses that are absolutely essential, which is why I'm calling for consultations. I really, really don't understand how you can make cuts without asking people, without saying, which buses work for you and which buses don't work for you. And are you taking this bus because this bus got cut? You need to be talking to communities. And, you know, now when everybody's used to being online, we can certainly do this more easily than we could before. There are lots of ways of doing this. The city did a fabulous job with consultations when they were talking about the Montreal Road detours, at least the first half. And then we never heard what other people said. We never heard what the results were. We never heard whether the opinions given were actually used. So I think that we have the way of the ability to do that. And I think that is a very democratic way of doing this. Ask the people who use the system, what do you need from the system? If you do it top down and you say, this is a service we are providing for you, adjust your schedule, that's really very frustrating for people.
Yeah,
So
no, I certainly agree. No, thank you for that. I know my daughter won't get on the 11 anymore to come home from school. She refuses because it's far too busy. She'll go in the morning because it isn't, but she won't come. She finds it unsafe because of the number of people on the 11. It's the other workhorse from the 12. And I hear about it every day around 4:30 when she drags herself into the house. But many people don't have the option of walking the 45 minutes. You know, it's different when you're 13, I suppose. But no, I hear you. I think that there's a lot to be considered, and I appreciate you coming out and sharing that. And I hope to have more consultation on what's going to happen in June. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. And thank you, Carrie, for coming out today. So next up, we have Jonathan Davis.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine, Jonathan. Go ahead when you're ready.
Okay, right on. Yeah, the other citizens who spoke were all really great. They said a lot of the things I wanted to say. So I guess I'll just talk about my personal experience and opinion about these cuts. I take the 257. Me and my son, we get up every morning. We leave the house at 6:15. We're home again by maybe 5:15, 5:30 in the evening because he goes to school downtown. I work downtown. And yeah, we take the 257. Our bus is going to be cut. But I guess, like, I understand. Sometimes it's just me and the boy on the bus. You know, I remember before the pandemic, it was standing room only. Stand by, it's train here. It was standing room only. And, you know, people used to try to give up their seat for the child. And I would say, no, don't get up. He's got to learn to stand. You know, I thought it was a skill he was going to have. But now it's just me and him, sometimes maybe one or two other people. So I understand the need to cut and to restructure, but I don't think you should be cutting the budget for transit. I think that this should be going into finding ways to make transit better. Like the person who spoke before me, they talked about how some of these office workers is not coming back. You can't count on that market to ever come back. And while transit was serving that market, they excluded a lot of other people. You know, like I remember those people that used to fill the bus, these well-dressed office types. You couldn't have like hobos and junkies on the bus along with those people. They wouldn't ride. While you were trying to sell this service to the affluent commuters, you were excluding other people with things like the price. When you try to exclude one group, it's gonna spill over into excluding someone else. You know, like if you want to include intoxicated people from a space, he's also going to exclude people with medical conditions.
Jonathan, can we ask you to focus on the adjustments?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
We're not talking about
right now, again, this is about community consultation for the cuts. You're making the cuts based on the numbers, the ridership that's actually decreased on these routes. It's like you're not even coming close to measuring the untapped market you have in these neighborhoods, the people that you've been excluding for years, right? It has to do with your administration being too focused on capturing revenue from the poorest people. So yeah, it's like ridership is down. It makes numerical sense. I can't deny it's just me and the boy on the bus. But I know there's people in my neighborhood who would take the bus if it was more affordable. You know, I don't think you're consulting. You might be recognizing the drop in ridership, but you're really ignoring the potential riders that could be using this service. You know, it's also, it makes the service crappier, this focus on revenue capturing. I already gave you the hours. Me and my son, we catch a bus at 6:15. We get home like 5:15, 5:30. It's going to take longer now if this cuts because we're going to have to connect. It's fine. It's going to make the boys stronger. That's fine. But it's the reason why it's slow. Every time the bus stops, you get on. The bus driver wants you to pay or something. The people with the card, they just tap and they keep moving. That's fast. But every time the bus stops and some poor person has to negotiate with the driver with their little coins, and the driver keeps the door open while the person is dropping the coins in. Like, what is he going to do? Kick the person off if they don't have enough, and then they have to forfeit the initial coins that they put in, and the rest.
Jonathan, please come back to the adjustments report. Okay. We're not talking about that today.
I am talking about this. I am talking about
opinion on it.
I'm talking now. You
okay, so are you done with the adjustments, Jonathan? We can get
I'm
the
talking about
next
the 257. I'm talking about the 257, my route that's being cut, my express route that goes downtown. Now I'm going to take the 168 and the 61. Those are both slow coaches that make all the stops. Those are both slow coaches that make all the stops. And if you're going to have a culture that's focused on revenue gathering, it's going to be even slower. People's going to be even more upset with the service. Ridership is going to drop when you should be focused on including people. Instead of including people who don't have the spare change, instead of excluding people that appear to be intoxicated, you've got to work on including the market that you've neglected for so long. And as for this, these counselors and managers and administrators at OC Transpo, I'm real disappointed with what I've heard today from you guys. The citizens are great, but as for a lot of you, do us a favor and resign,
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Next up is Alex Riel. Alex? Okay, no, Alex. Blaine Cameron, I saw you on the screen there. I believe you're with us. You're up when you're ready.
Okay, thank you for having me. I'm Blaine Cameron. I'm the chair of the Central Ottawa Acorn chapter, and I live in Centertown. And I require the use of a power wheelchair, and I am here to represent Acorn and our membership. As many of you know, Acorn is a grassroots community membership-driven group of low and moderate income people fighting for social and economic justice. We see the reality of how important it is to protect our public transit in order to protect the rights of our members and other riders who rely on this essential service and not make their daily lives even more difficult. Many of the previous speakers have spoken to being able to take alternate routes when you miss a bus and the often unreliability of buses showing up at a certain time and you missing it because they showed up early and took off, stuff of that nature. Many of Acorn's members include frontline workers working at or near the minimum wage in essential jobs who need to have options like that. As the previous gentleman mentioned, a pretty essential route for him is being cut. The necessities, these people having to use the bus, it's necessitated in order to get to their essential work as grocery store clerks, personal support workers, hospital admin staff, janitorial services, and many more. Not everyone has the privilege of working from home. As COVID restrictions have eased, we've actually seen a 10% increase in ridership. And in June, we'll begin seeing the general population getting vaccinated. Ridership needs time to bounce back, and making cuts now to service will only make it more difficult for riders who need this essential service for work and groceries, and it creates a barrier to medical appointments, including COVID testing and vaccinations. And it will also keep others in their cars, contributing to climate change. We're also looking at a third wave of the pandemic. By reducing the frequency of bus routes, you would be increasing people's exposure to COVID. It doesn't make sense to put more riders per route in enclosed spaces with a virus that spreads as such. Demand is not decreasing. it has up to this point, but it's not continuing to decrease for now. So more people on fewer buses isn't safe. I'm lucky. I live in the core of the city, but many low-income people are not able to afford to live near major transit routes, and they need to access it the most. They're continually displaced and pushed further and further to the margins of our geographically enormous city, making way for luxury condos, developer profits, and poor train route choices. Herongate and Manor Village come to mind on that front. Low-income people often cannot afford to take taxis or Ubers or get a car from such long distances to make up for cuts to service to such an essential thing as public transit. The City Council continually invests in road expansion for privileged car users while reducing and cutting public transit for the most vulnerable of our city, which is also antithetical to the city's declaration of a climate emergency.
Blaine,
We
can
need
I
to focus.
ask you to come back to the report? It's about adjustments. It's not about cuts. We're talking about changing some of the trips that you speak of will change from a 15-minute service to a 30-minute service. I highly doubt that's going to take the two people, as we heard in the last example of a route, the two people that are on that route and that is changing from 15-minute to 30-minute, it doesn't take away the transit service. It makes a slight change in it, but when you only have two people on a bus, the taxpayers of Ottawa expect us to do something about that.
1 minute left.
Reallocate funds from other areas. By making the service less frequent, reducing it, it is like a cut, because that discourages people from coming back to the service if they're unable to use it, and it just doesn't serve them. I'll get back to we need to focus on making our public transit more accessible, affordable, and user-friendly. A lot of ACORN members often have no other choice but to use OC Transpo. This is by no means a testament to the quality of service, rather a recrimination of an already poor system, which will be made worse by further reductions. And as was said before, there's no guarantee that these services will come back. If we really want to lead the way to combating climate change and creating an equitable society for people of all incomes, we need to make our public transit a real alternative to cars.
Time.
Which means we should be
Okay,
investing.
that's fine.
Investing
Thank you, Blaine. I can assure you the routes will come back if the ridership is there. We have the process in place to add routes back in if necessary. So I just have one question for you, and then Councilor Mckinney has one. Of all your ACORN members, did anyone mention any route out of this adjustments report that was negatively impacting them? And if so, what route and how was that?
There will be members.
Yet.
There will be members speaking after me who can address that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Councilor Mckinney.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Blaine. My question was similar to the chair's. I have heard from people specifically about which routes will affect them and how it will affect them. Route 6 and 7 that go down Bank Street that people count on to get to essential businesses, to get to groceries, to get to pharmacies, to get to daycares. So I have heard, and so I was going to ask you the same question. So I'm glad to hear that others are coming up after you. The 55 I have serious concerns about, and the buses that run up and down Merivale Road, for example, the 80 and the 86, I think I brought up earlier. I have serious concerns because they are the very transit cuts, call them what we all may. I'm not sure why we thought nobody would show up to oppose what's happening here today, but good on you for showing up, even though you're being a bit badgered here. So thank you, Blaine, for coming out. I've already answered my question, and I look forward to other members also coming and letting us know what we're doing with their tax dollars and what we're doing with their public transit and how it's going to negatively affect them. Because it doesn't negatively affect any one of us. Thanks, Blaine.
Thank you, Councillor.
Okay, thank you, Blaine, for your presentation today. And Councilor Mckinney, for the record, I'm just trying to stick to the report, which is what we're dealing with. We can't get into these offline discussions because we will take away the opportunity from people to talk about specific report routes and how they're impacted. So
I don't disagree. I don't disagree, Chair, but I think that we have to have some latitude when people believe that these adjustments are cuts to service. We have to have that latitude and allow them to say so. Thank you.
Absolutely, and that's where I'm looking for specific examples so we can address it. Okay, next up is Stephanie Graham, please. Stephanie Graham. There you go.
Sorry about that. I belong to Acorn as well, and I live in Vanier. And I think that all citizens need accessible and available transit, and this includes the price of fares. As the LRT is only a few kilometers in length, and the city buses should be able to get to the stations, but most buses I use are only every half hour, which means, and I have to take two buses, which means that if I miss one, I have a half-hour wait to get the next bus. This is not convenient because I'm a senior with mobility issues. Transit delays in service are common. So if you're cutting the service more, this is going to be an increasing problem. The transfers are, as I said, are inconvenient because of the fact that lots of times you have to walk 2 or 3 blocks to get to your transfer, or you have to wait. I once tried to get to the Civic Hospital from Fanny, and it took me 2 hours. I had to walk from King Edward up to Laurier to catch a bus to take me to the Civic Hospital, and my sister-in-law was dying. This isn't a convenient, and this was in pouring rain, so it's not convenient for anyone. Buses are often rerouted and canceled without communications. And I really think, as other people have spoken about, communication with the public is essential. You use the internet for scheduling, but it's not user-friendly, especially for older people that have no sense of computers. And there's very few buses that run north to south. So to go anywhere, you have to go east to west first and then get to north to south. And this includes another transfer. And as other people were mentioning, not only is it not safe, it's disrespectful to people with mobility problems. And I agree that the cost is certainly an important issue here. And I know that you're not taking into account that right now, but as I was working and I was a single mother of 3 children, teenagers, I would have a hard time to be able to afford to take them anywhere nowadays with the cost of the bus. And I agree that this is about the transit readjustments, but I do think that you need to reconsider involving more than just a few people of the public, this should be a public discussion for everyone. Thank you very much. And I know I've gotten off script, but a lot of my things have already been said, and so I'm going to close it now.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. There's a couple of questions for you, and I appreciate hearing your firsthand experience with this. I don't know if you're aware or not, but Commissioner Brockington actually had a successful motion earlier this year to bring in a family pass. So that example you gave of trying to get places with 3 kids, that new pass that's coming is actually going to address that. So we are hearing those experiences, and we're trying to find ways to help people with that. First up, I believe, is Councilor Mckinney.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Stephanie, for coming out. I just want to confirm something, and you don't have to answer one way or the other, but you said you lived in Vanier. You either own your own home or you rent, one or the other. Don't tell me what, you don't have to tell me which one, but that is the case, right?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So you are a taxpayer. We talk about taxpayers a lot around this table, and that much of what we're doing here is for taxpayers. So I just want to point out that as a taxpayer, you are also a transit rider, and it's important that we remember that people who take transit also pay taxes. And so when they're coming to us and saying, you know what, I get it's about priorities. I get that it's not a bottomless pit of money, but I am also a taxpayer, and I demand a public service that I have actually paid into. So you have actually paid into this service for many, many years. So I just wanted to be able to point that out, and thank you for your for coming out today and pointing out just what it is. And I agree with Chair Hubley. We are always looking for ways to enhance the service, things like family passes, so that, and other, passes that help people in different circumstances. And I hope that you'd be able to take advantage of that. But I did want to just ensure that we were really clear that people coming out who take transit also are taxpayers, and you pay for the service already. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. McKinney.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Next up is Commissioner Wright Gilbert.
Hello, Ms. Graham. Thank you for joining us today and sharing your experiences with us. Am I right in assuming that you depend on OC Transpo and public transit pretty much solely to get to your important appointments and groceries?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So if this, with these service cuts that, I mean, reductions are cuts, let's not argue over the semantics, but with these cuts to the service, is it going to make your daily life more difficult in order to go get your groceries, go to your appointments?
It already has. We barely go out because of the fact that we usually wait till Wednesdays or Sundays because we're seniors.
Right.
And Sundays is absolutely horrible to take buses because the service is already slowed down so much.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you have mobility issues. My father has mobility issues, so I understand that point of view and how difficult it can be to even, walk to the community mailbox. And so my question is that if you had to walk, say, for example, to the next bus stop, the next available bus stop in your neighborhood, because that's where the bus would be coming, would that be really, really difficult for you with your mobility issues?
Not so much now, but the thing is that because they're distancing the stops more, if when they're distanced, I'm talking not only for me, I'm talking for other people. Yeah. I've had 2 knee replacements, which, I mean, I'm good with it. But I'm talking about the people that have to use walkers or have to use canes or have to use crutches.
Yep.
These people, I'm not speaking only for myself, I'm speaking for others because I am a member of ACORN, which is fighting for low and medium income families and whatever. So we need to have an appropriate service for everybody. And as I said at the beginning, it's an accessibility issue.
Yes. Absolutely. I agree with you, Ms. Graham. It is an accessibility issue, and it's also an issue that we need to not exclude or make life harder for those amongst us whose lives are already a little bit hard or very hard. So thank you very much for sharing your perspectives with us, not only your own personal perspective, but also perspectives of others in your area and in Acorn. I truly, truly appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. So next up, thank you, Stephanie, for your presentation today. It's appreciated. Next up is Jean Bosco.
Okay, thank you. My name is Jean Bosco Nakiltimana. I live in Bikonwidi village. I am also Acorn member. I don't have a new story, but I think I still need to share my experience with the OC Transport. Actually, before I started driving a few years ago, I was a regular user of OC Transport, but still some people in my family use OC Transport on a regular basis. You said that you are not planning to cut the line, but just adjustment. But for me, whatever you are planning to do, I think it should be better to consult first with people. My fear is that you say that's fine. You say that you are not cutting line. My concern is that any adjustment you would make may affect or may increase people vulnerability. I think it is very, very important for our city to see how to balance saving and concern for people vulnerability. Sometimes I take, as I told you, now I drive now, but sometimes I take bus. I appreciate service, but sometimes there is delay. Also, sometimes I have to pay for taxi, Uber or Blue Line or Capitol. I see how it is expensive. It is not everybody who can afford that. So I'm pleading with you so that you may seek to balance saving and concern for people vulnerability. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming out today. We appreciate your presentation. Next up is Lauren Stewart Mundy.
Hello, my name is Lauren Stewart Mundy. I am a member of Acorn as well, and I also live in Vanier. I'm coming here to speak from my own personal experience as an OC Transpo rider. It's important because this is almost single-handedly going to affect low and working class people. Basically, anyone who has to take the bus, people who have lost their jobs, they have been affected by the pandemic, they have lost their hours, they are not making a lot of money in the first place. Even if the ridership is down for now, I have many people who I know who live in Barhaven and far-flung parts of the city who have been pushed out of the downtown core, and who are going to be affected by these cuts. We are getting increased vaccination rates right now. So in the next month or year or so, the ridership will pick up. And it's going to be the same thing that happened when we saw the reduction in buses for the train line 1, and the train turned out not to fulfill our needs. There was a lot of gaps, a lot of breakage. I was stuck on that train many times. So of course ridership is down, but at the end of the day, there are people like my family who need this, people who are in dire straits, people who have been losing their jobs, people in poverty who aren't getting out anytime soon. This is the same as we had before, and we're supposed to be social distancing, and we're having cuts to our services. It's really the frontline essential workers. Think of the PSWs who take the buses, who work with vulnerable people. When you really look at this, the cuts affect the entire city. I use like the 17 and the 15 are among the routes that I use. I use it to go grocery shopping, and I try to be efficient and hit the pharmacy and so on and so forth on the way home. My partner volunteers and works on Morrison Drive out near IKEA. They're about looking at the proposed changes. There are butts that go to Harringay, Vanier. These are all low-income areas. They will be difficult to ramp up after this reduction, and people won't be able to come back. My probably already had is having trouble getting to her job. She already has to commute an hour and a half to get to Morrison. And she has a disability, which was brought on by an infectious disease, by the way. So she's already at risk. It's going to make this more difficult. Her commute is Vanier to IKEA. She's already struggling to keep a connection with the outside world. She's already had her role in her organization reduced, and she feels left out. She has a hearing impairment. It makes her much more difficult to participate with mask mandates, which is understandable. But she also can't just call a cab. She is at the mercy of surge pricing on rideshare apps. And also, like, we use it for essential travel, such as getting groceries done and going to the bank. Apps that can deliver to your house, but they have a 10% surcharge. So over a $200 grocery order, that's a lot of money over a year. Going to the grocery store is way cheaper for people like my family who are on a budget. Even on the current system, peak periods are hard and impossible to social distance and be responsible on the buses. And we're trying to pack more people onto these buses. I heard other people ask if the councils have taken the Take the Bus challenge. You know, I know many people weren't able to do it before the virus broke out. I would like to see this attempted again. How much will this cost to hire people back afterwards? We say it's through attrition, but there is a cost for hiring, training, and bringing people back. I don't trust that we are going to get the same level of service as has done before. This is just a sneaky way of going after the working class, the working poor, and people who are low income.
1 minute left.
Okay. There are people who can't afford a car. We can't afford to Uber every day. There are tons of seniors who live on my street, people who are already under immense pressure and stress, cutting services during a pandemic that serves people who are the most at risk, who don't have another choice. It's turning around our backs on the people who need it in our communities.
Thank you very much, Lauren, for your presentation coming up today. Next up is Raz Rootley.
Yeah, thank you. So there are two groups that I'm a part of that I would like to speak to today. The first is one that I think often gets left behind in federal and municipal and provincial governments, and that is disabled Canadians, and specifically young disabled Canadians. We've had people speak to mobility issues with seniors, but I have a disorder called POTS as well as chronic pain. And so because I have POTS, I'm not allowed to get a driver's license. So even if I had the money for a car, I would not be able to drive. So I rely completely on public transit. I moved to Ottawa in September, and before that I was living in a small town that didn't have a public transit system. And I was super isolated in my house. I wasn't able to get out, and I would really not like to see that happen again and continue to be able to use the Ottawa public transit system, as that was one of the major reasons that I moved into a city, because it allows me to be independent and be mobile while working with my disability. Additionally, having an extra like 5-10 minute walk is not a big deal for most people. That consistently drains my energy and is a big deal for people living with disabilities. An extra 15 minutes waiting in a bus stop is an extra 15 minutes that I'm outside of my house. And additionally, a 5 or 10 minute walk is a big deal for some people. And I completely rely on public transit. I used to be able to bike places, but that's no longer a reality for me. So public transit is basically my only way of getting around the city. And additionally, university students, which has been mentioned in the presentation, is one of the places that we would like to see ridership come back. As one thing that I don't know how aware you are, there's still 1,300 students living on Carleton residence who primarily use the 7 bus to get groceries, to get to pharmacies, to get anywhere in the city. That is the main bus that we are using, as well as the Line 2 replacement bus. So there's still 1,300 students living on campus that will be affected by these cuts, this Carleton campus specifically. And then the general outside of residents, like talking to university students and my peers, a lot of people are like, how do you use the bus this often? Like, I would never use the bus. I hate using the bus. They complain about cuts, and that is why a lot of university students don't use it and will walk, like if they're able to, they will walk 40 minutes to school rather than taking the bus. So I think that these cuts, they're increasing the already prevalent wait times at bus stops is not going to help bring university student ridership back. Specifically to Carleton, I can't speak for you, Ottawa or Algonquin, but for us, since we're kind of further outside of the city core, a lot of people really hate using the bus and hate the waits. It'll make them late for classes. I'm currently missing a class to be here right now because I care about this issue a lot. But the increased wait times from these cuts are not only going to impact disabled people living in Ottawa, but also university students, and it'll make them less likely to use the buses.
Okay, thank you for your presentation, and thank you for sharing your experience with us too. It's very helpful. We appreciate you coming out today. Next up is Sophia Descali. Am I saying that right?
Descalzi, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out, Sophie. Go ahead and start whenever you're ready.
Good morning, Chair and Committee Council members. My name is Sophia. I'm a 27-year-old resident at Beacon Hill, and I'm here to urge you to not accept the service adjustments proposed on the report being discussed today. When the pandemic started, the federal government asked us to work from home if possible, and that's what a lot of us did. The provincial government has been implemented lockdown measures in order just to stay home, and that's what I did. But now seeing the report that Route 224 is on the chopping block, it feels as if I'm being punished by the city for following public health advice and regulations. Again, I ride the bus less because that's what I was told to do, but now this report is recommending stopping that route because of low ridership. So I'm confused, to say the least. Not being able to take the express route and having to take Route 24 puts at least an extra 10 minutes on my commute and affects my office hours and how I organize my morning and also how I come back. I'm at a point in my life where I'm choosing where to settle down. Ottawa has always been a top choice for me because in the past few years you have made strides to improve public transit, but approving this report will be a step backwards. I don't own a car. I don't intend to. It's expensive. So accessible and robust public transit is a top 3 factor on deciding where I want to live. And it's discouraging to see that this report prioritizes Band-Aid savings while hurting the communities affected of the services that are intended to serve. We should be talking about how to improve our transit system, not how to make it more isolated for individuals and families. I want to live here. I want to stay here, but I do not want to live in a city that is disconnected and where it's hard to get around. As a young person, I'm also very concerned about climate change, and the city has a huge role to play to ensure we have a livable future, and public transit is at the core of a greener city. Cutting routes and extending wait times would force some people to take rideshare services. Just to put it into perspective, an Uber ride doesn't cost less than $15 to almost anywhere from Beacon Hill. That's higher than minimum wage for a single ride. So this will leave a lot of people behind, and this measure is literally at odds of having a city be a leader in climate action. Lastly, I'm concerned that the report doesn't stipulate an end to this temporary suspension and extend wait times from what I was able to see. And more often than not, I've seen changes such as these become permanent. This will be a loss for the community and for making Ottawa a city worth settling down in. I have a question, and is what was the consultation process for this report? I learned about it yesterday just by fluke at 8 p.m. at night. So I wrote very rushed notes, and I have family members who use these routes on a regular basis that don't even know that this is happening. Family members that are frontline workers, that are women, that would have to extended distances just to get to the bus stop, and it's just unfair that they don't even have a say in this matter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Tierney, you have a question?
Yes, thank you very much for coming out and presenting today. I too have many concerns about the 224. I've fought for this route for many, many years. And I also will be asking many of the questions that you brought up to city staff when we get our opportunity to ask staff. That's my biggest fear too, is that 224 services a lot of, let's face it, there's a lot of government workers on that bus. And I want to know when crowds start coming back. And I've heard two sides. I'll be very honest. I've heard people saying, why is there polluting buses that are empty driving around the community? So this is a very difficult discussion to square. I want to know how we're going to reinstate. So I'll be asking that on your behalf when we get to the question and answer session. But I just wanted to thank you for coming out today.
Thank you. And just on that, I think that campaigns to increase ridership are really important, because the answer will never be more vehicles for combating pollution.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much, Sophia. Appreciate you coming out and saying this, and that you caught this. You were saying that others have been affected by it. It's primarily a lot of women who are being affected by this cut. That would be very useful for us to hear, to find out how they're being affected. And I appreciate the councillor of the area is interested as well. Perhaps there can be some communications with them. Is that possible? Yeah, because yes, is it possible that you could, that if you're hearing from people that are saying this is an issue, I think it would be helpful to know about it, to document it, because we're dealing with specific cuts, and we should know if they're directly impacted.
Yeah, for sure. And that's one of my concerns, is that this was not an open consultation process, and those people don't even know that this is happening. So I will be more than happy to be an intermediary if necessary, to bring those voices to the front, so that you folks can also hear them firsthand of how this is impacting, like my cousins, my partner's family, on how they are not even gonna, how they're not gonna benefit from this route. And I also, as a woman, not benefiting from cutting this route as well. So you have my voice to add to that.
No, I appreciate you coming out and expressing it, and you're very specific about the concerns. So I think that's worth passing on, and especially if you know of others. So thank you very much.
Is there an email maybe I can send it to?
Yeah, I believe the local councillor is here. So and he can be in touch with you through the clerk, perhaps. Yeah, he's nodding his head. So I think that would be good to work with you on that. Thank you very much, Sophia. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Next up is Iman Al-Khatib. Hope I pronounced that right.
Yes, hello, hi.
Hi.
Hi, good morning, councillors. Hello, members of the Transit Commission. I'm here today to talk about the reduction of routes and services. I'm a member of CAWI and OCH residents, and I have many times used OC Transport to get around the city. I'm worried that many residents like me and others who don't have a car available are going to be negatively affected by this service cut. Unaffordability of transit and lack of frequent service in some areas already makes it very hard on residents, especially residents who are experiencing other challenges like being low income, experiencing disabilities, or whose entire families are dependent on transit. It's already very difficult to access OC transport. On top of that, now reduced services and cut routes will only make it more difficult for the vulnerable residents. I worried for community members and how they will be impacted by this. The cuts are also coming at the time when many people might need transit to access vaccines safely. Other cities are actually making it easier for people to access vaccine, making it making transit free to those traveling to their COVID-19 vaccination appointment. City of Ottawa needs more investments, not cuts, to transit services that are an important part of for many residents' lives. We need a strong and healthy transit system that can support our residents, our seniors, and our youth. We need to do better. I urge the city to reconsider their decision today. Thank you so much for listening and have a nice day.
Thank you. Councilor Mckinney has a question for you, please. Go ahead, Councilor.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Iman. It's nice to hear from you. It's been a long time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I don't see you out there in the community as often right now. But listen, I just want to ask you specifically. So, you take transit to get around regularly. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And what routes do you take?
I usually take 86. I guess 86, 89 on Fisher going toward the either downtown or go the other way this line.
Okay, and that is one of the routes that is being adjusted. So there will be less frequent service. And tell me just, in a regular day, what would you use the bus to do? What would you take the bus for?
Well, I used to take bus daily to work, but now I've been laid off of work, and it's because of the pandemic since last year. And I usually like mostly maybe because my work is in the afternoon, so in the morning I used to go to City Hall, always to Elegant, to Women's Center. I go to like mostly downtown, like we mostly have with college trainings, workshops. Yes, and so either to a monument or to go other way, maybe to Walmart or to Food Basics. So I'm a mom of 5 kids and have grandkids, and always busy. Like I'd like to be kind of like active and busy in the community. So I usually go to City Hall and to the Women's Center downtown. So we usually having trainings and workshops a lot. Yeah. So
yeah. Okay. No, I appreciate that. I just think it's important for us to hear what the adjustments, what that less frequent service will do. It will add, time on both sides of your day, and even more so in inclement weather. But I'm sorry to hear that you were laid off, Iman. I hope that things improve and that you're able to get employment again when this is over. It's really nice to see you. Thank
you so much.
Thanks for coming.
I appreciate your presence, Councilor. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Councilor Mckinney, and thank you very much, Iman, for your presentation. Next up is Samantha Boswell, and Vice Chair, if I could just ask you to take over. I need to step away for a couple of minutes.
Absolutely, Chair. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So I'll consider it a compliment that I scared the chair right out of the room as soon as I came up for my delegation. So yay me. At this point, coming second last or third last, everybody has covered everything that I had in my notes, but I will reemphasize 3 things. You may get a few minutes back from the delegation time if I don't manage to babble for 5 minutes. But first of all, I take strong objection to continuing to call this reductions and when these are cuts. So we are using this diplomatic wishy-washy word, but these are cuts. For anybody that is trying to rely on these routes that are being reduced or cut completely, you can put as many flowery words in there as you like, but people are going to wait longer, they're going to walk further, they're not going to be able to rely on these routes. So there are service cuts. So if we're going to do this to the people who are having to use the transit service right now, at least be brave and honest and call them cuts. Secondly, somebody else touched on this, I think it was Sam Hirsch. We have to stop calling a public transit a business, like treating it like a business. It is a service. We wouldn't go, oh, hey, fewer people are downtown during the day in the office towers, less water is being used. Let's reduce the water that's being provided to buildings. Let's reduce the internet that's being provided to buildings. It's not a service, it should be. Let's reduce the electricity. These are all things that we just count on. Public transit should be one of those things. We shouldn't be trying to justify saving a nickel and a dime here and there at the cost of people who have to use public transit. Never mind the hypocrisy of declaring a climate emergency and then continuing to fund road expansions and all of this other garbage in the face of cutting transit and raising the fares. This is embarrassing from the capital city, first of all. Like, it's infuriating. And thirdly, and some of my other colleagues at the Ottawa Transit Riders have touched on this, no consultations yet again. This is one thing that we have been consistent about, our group and all of the other advocacy groups that have showed up today. Talk to the riders. You can't just make these decisions and then slip them through and then be surprised when you get 20 delegations showing up in the middle of a work day, taking time out of their days to tell you that we haven't been talked to again. We have brought this up for years at this point. You have to talk to the riders. And most of the people here that I'm seeing on the screen aren't riders. So you can't be making these decisions. You have to be talking to people who are using the buses and who are going to suffer if you keep charging more money and cutting the service. And somebody said, well, no, let's just, if there's problems, just tell your councillor. People don't know this is coming because they haven't been consulted. So I could go across, I guarantee I'll walk across to my neighbor and go, hey, did you know transit's being cut again? And they will be shocked and surprised. Actually, they won't. Nothing surprises us with Ottawa anymore, but they won't have seen it coming. They won't know it's coming. So how do they complain to our councillor if they don't know something is happening? A lot of people are only going to know when they show up to get a bus that doesn't show up. So I guess to sum up, these cuts should not happen. Stop treating OC Transport like it's a business. It's not. Find the money. The money is there. And for God's sake, please talk to your transit riders. Finally. And this transit working group that apparently is out there that nobody has heard anything about and none of the advocacy groups have been involved, that's also a problem. And that could have helped you with your communication. So that is it. I don't know where I am in terms of minutes, but that is my piece. Thank you for letting us speak today.
Thank you very much, Samantha. Sorry, I had to find my mute button as I'm connected on my phone today. Thank you very much for coming today. Eric, I can't see the participants list. Do we have any hands up for questions for Ms. Boswell?
If I may, Vice Chair, I'm back. I'd just like to make a comment. I just got tailwind of the delegates suggesting that she scared me away. I just, for the benefit of the commission, I'm the primary caregiver of my father. And every day at this time, I have to make a phone call. It only takes me a couple of minutes, so I apologize. And no, Samantha, you didn't scare me away. It's family obligation. So does anybody have any questions for the delegation? No? Okay, so thank you, Samantha, for coming out today. Next up is John Reddens. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Good morning. Good morning.
Go ahead, John, whenever you're ready.
I'm ready. Good morning. First of all, a reminder that we are on traditional Algonquin territory. Shout out to Eric for putting this meeting together. He was up emailing the participants late last night. First of all, a few weeks ago, we had no meeting planned for a while. Then all of a sudden, there's one because we had to deal with the issues of transit. Now, one of the things I see lots of is there's a lot of empty buses. A lot of trust is not there. I can go back to 2014 on social media. I was going to OC Transport, many buses to TD empty. November 12th, 2012, empty buses. Ottawa Bureau Chief from Maclean's Magazine OC Transpo has terrible one bus early, and next one, half dozen buses empty. There's always going to be empty buses, but it's an attack on people that can't afford a vehicle. I'm personally myself, during this pandemic, before the pandemic, I couldn't afford it. I got rid of my vehicle. My wife's had, 4 strokes since last June. Well, during this pandemic, we decided that for my chronic health that I'd stay in and she go and do the running around. I live in Huron Gate. We go to Riverside, the mall, Riverside, and that's her spot to get stuff. She can't get on the buses. There's no buses in between where we go. She ends up walking with a cane. Now you want to cut more on Bank Street. What is going on? What is going on? I'm being punished for good behavior. She's being punished for good behavior. These are some of the things here. And then you just, last month, you just decided $16 million for an LRT case. But you have to cut transit. 112 million for 3.3 kilometers of road, but you have to cut transit. Come on, you can do better. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for coming out today and sharing your experience, and it's much appreciated. Next up is Miranda Gray, please.
Hello, Chair. Can you confirm you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine. You can start whenever you're ready, Miranda.
Thank you. My name is Miranda Gray. I'm a resident of Ward 1 and a frequent delegation to this committee. I do live along one of the routes that is impacted. The 32 would be the closest route to my house. It is not my primary route, but it would be the closest route to my house. I'm here today to speak more about the process of how you were doing this than your actual cuts. It is disingenuous, I feel, to bring this up so quickly when I know that for your driver's contract, you need to give them more than 3 months notice of what routes are coming up. So these changes were in discussion for a long time and certainly could have come before the commission or in front of riders for comments before they were unchangeable. While I know you are listening to us today, I also know that these changes are pretty much written in stone. So that's part of the frustration you're getting from your riders. The other frustration is that you don't share information with us proactively for us to see how these changes are going along. When it comes to the July 1st or the August 1st point, it will be important to know how the reliability of these routes that have been adjusted has also been impacted. When you take a route from 20 minutes to 30 minutes and it remains as unreliable as it was, it's a double impact. What we need to see on routes that are reduced to 30 minutes is higher reliability. That means adjusting which routes you make as a priority for adjustments and which ones are a priority for maintaining the line, even if you need to cancel somewhere else. So I need to know that you're making those changes in the background, and none of that is addressed in this document. The problem is this document is not written for riders. It is written in a way for transit authorities and maybe council authorities, but it does nothing to improve your communication with riders. You're only going to grow ridership if you include us in the discussion. And this has been yet another discussion without us. You need to be talking to us. That means consultation groups out of each of your major hubs, so you can have stakeholders that speak for the people that work out of Blair, the people that transfer out of Tunney's Pasture and Fallowfield. It's not a citywide consultation that you need. It's hyper-focused when you're making these changes. but you have to talk to us in advance. That means we should already be talking about September and next December changes. Throwing them up 3 months in advance when you've already got drivers selecting routes is a disservice to the communication with your riders or your customers if you want to talk business, and it erodes the relationship between us. I am a transit rider by choice. It's a deliberate conscious decision, but I have to admit that when my mother offered me her car last month, I really considered it. And that's because I no longer trust that you are a partner with me in transportation across the city. You don't talk to me, even though I try very hard to be engaged. So if you want to maintain and build ridership so that you're not constantly doing reductions, you need to improve the communication. That means don't call it an adjustment if it's a cut, be upfront. If you mean it's temporary, you're going to have to prove that it's temporary, because we never see these things roll back. When we get service reinstated, it's typically in a different format, not what we had before. Some of these are route consolidations. They're not temporary changes. Please use plain, clear language with a set of definitions, metrics we can check you against to improve the communication. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Miranda, for coming out, and I do agree with you that rebuild's an issue that always needs more work. There will be at the April meeting a report on performance measures and performance of the system from last year that I'm sure you and others will find very helpful.
Sorry, Chair. If we're only going to get it 1 week in advance, that is not sufficient for the community consultation we need. If you're going to be doing it in April, we need it very shortly so that we can have the engagement at our local groups, so that we don't have hundreds of people come here and say the same thing. The earlier you share documents with us, the better the consultation, the better the feedback. 1 week is not enough for community groups.
Unfortunately, that's the system that the city works under for committees, is that the reports are released a week before the date. It's something we'll certainly pass on your desire to have that much sooner than a week. Whether something can be done during this term is another matter.
You're not required to hit the minimum standard when you're making major changes. This is a major change. It would be a great time for you to direct staff to do more than meet the minimum standard. The minimum
right, and that's why we called a special meeting, Miranda, for today. We didn't want to wait till the April one. As soon as the report was ready, I wanted it out there, as did the members of the commission. I think we all agree that the special meeting was warranted to get this out, to give the public a chance to not only see it a week ahead, but to come today and discuss. Miranda, please. You also have, and the public has up till June when the changes kick in. There's discussions taking place with the individual councillors in the area, the routes that are affected, and so on. So there's the OC Transpo open lines of communication that people can email in if they have any specific concerns with this, and things will be looked at and addressed where possible. Okay.
You cut off multiple delegations today who wanted to talk to the broader issues by saying you can talk in April. So don't tell us that we could have talked about it today when you cut people off. You can have it one way or the other. You told us we had to speak to specific routes today, so we did not talk about general principles.
Correct. We're not talking about the general stuff. Councillor Kavanaugh has a question for you.
Thank you, Miranda, and thank you for coming out today. I know you're a regular transit user. In terms of the consultation, what do you see as the right amount of time to reach out to riders in terms of generally?
Well, there's two types of consultation you need. I would suggest that you need standing stakeholder groups for each of your major districts, so that you have a group of people beyond the councillors who actually are regular riders, who have a track record of understanding the history to provide some feedback. When we're talking about groups like transit riders, ACORN, the FCA, the Paratranspo group, it's probably no less than 2 weeks, because people have busy schedules. Realistically, if you are doing a massive change, talking about long-term principles, it's probably more than a month. So if you're setting a service performance standard that's going to kick in next December, and talk about how we are restructuring, because we know that ridership levels are not going to return in less than 3 years or we think it might take 3 to 5 years, that discussion needs to take months. If we are talking about the plan to return to service in the fall on the belief that all the schools are open, we're probably talking 2 to 3 weeks. It's depending on how big a change you're putting in front of us. If we are talking specifics, it takes less time. If we are talking general principles, it's a long-term discussion that we're going to use for years, and we should take significant time in discussing it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Miranda, for coming out. That closes the public delegations part of the meeting. And now do any of the commissioners have questions for staff? Okay, Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Chair. I represent the city on a national body and we're meeting at noon, so I will probably have to leave a few minutes earlier. That is the reason. Thank you to staff for the presentation and for our public delegations that came out today. I do hear the multiple requests to have better engagement on these changes, and I want to talk about that a bit. OC Transpo modifies routes on a quarterly basis all the time. And I just want to ask staff, and maybe Mr. Scrimgeour can clarify that we do these changes. We probably don't do the same scope of changes that are being proposed for June. If Mr. Scrimgeour could just comment on that.
That's correct. 4 times a year, we have the opportunity to make schedule changes. They are sometimes service improvements that come from council investing more money in transit. They are sometimes seasonal changes, such as when we add service to the parks and remove service to the schools during the summer. We also respond at each of those quarterly changes to major increases in ridership that we're seeing on some routes, or in some cases, reductions in ridership. It's also our opportunity to change schedules to improve reliability, and we continue this. We've got changes coming up in April, which, as you know, include reliability improvements and getting ready for the Montreal Road construction. And these are changes that will come in June. Along with these changes in June also come the seasonal changes with the school holidays.
I appreciate that. Probably in the future, if we know the number of changes proposed exceed a certain threshold, it may want to trigger an additional opportunity for consultations. If it's sort of the regular changes you do on a quarterly basis, which you have the delegated authority to do anyway, then I think that's different. But I think there was a number of points made today that I think we have to think further on. Just on the financial side, what was our 2020 deficit and what is the 2021 proposed deficit for transit?
Chair, I don't know if finance staff are on the line. Is Wendy?
I don't think we had anybody from finance here to answer those questions today, Councillor Brockington. It was strictly on the adjustments and redeployments.
Do we have any commitment yet? I've asked this at our last meeting from the feds or province about a financial commitment after April 1st to help with the operating side of the balance sheet.
So, Councillor, members of the commission, Wendy is giving you a comprehensive review of that at the FEDCO meeting. In terms of the deficit for 2021, I think we're at around 13 million, which is very, very, scope and scale of all the magnitude we had, $650 million budget. A big chunk of that was insurance claims and so forth. So, and then that 3 million that I referenced in the beginning of the pandemic. So we came in very close to budget. And then Wendy is also working feverishly on all of the inputs as to what 2022 will look like, and she will have a wholesome update for you at FITCO.
We used provincial and federal money to survive 2020, and without that same investment in 2021, we as a transit commission engaging our public have to make decisions. That's the whole point of the criteria report coming us to in April, is that we don't have a financial bailout or assistance yet from the feds or provincial government. And there's no murmur, no indication, nothing from higher levels up that this is coming.
No, sorry, Councillor, if that's the message I'm leaving you, is right now you're in very good shape for 2021. And you're not just relying on bailouts. My first slide that I referred to is this expenditure controls. The other things that we've done helped you in 2020, and in 2021, the picture looks very good. I don't have the exact numbers, but Wendy is working on that, and the treasurer is bringing that to FedCo. So we have $5.5 million that we're committing now, and we're proactively reserving 11 million in 2022. And I heard many speakers talk about forecasts. And Councillor, as you and I talked about, I'd be very careful with people making bold predictions, such as the last speaker talking about 3 years out. That is not what we're seeing on the data worldwide, which we get on a regular basis. And the curve can take off very, very quickly, especially with some of the innovative things that we're doing on redeployment and so forth.
So are you saying even though ridership is not going to hit 70%, which is what we budgeted in 2021, financially we're in better shape?
Thanks to the work of our funding partners, the expenditure controls, this mitigation measure, Wendy and I are very confident you're going to be in a very good place in 2021. She's putting all those pieces together for you.
Okay, so any type of reductions that are coming after today may not be as extensive as initially concerned or worried about in 2020.
We are bringing you the criteria in April. I'm not recommending any cuts in April to you. You will have a very difficult decision to make amongst yourselves. You know, somebody asked how much consultation. If you do consultation on deep cuts, such as what was talked about in the past, you're well into 2022 before implementing and getting consultations. I mean, look at today's challenge. We're talking about getting rid of empty buses, and already there's backlash on it, which I understand. I'm not being critical. But if you're going to get into, you know, somebody mentioned route optimization, that took months. You're into 2022 before you implement any of those cuts. Again, I'm not bringing you recommendations to cut in April. I'm bringing you what I promised you, which was the criteria.
Thank you. Mr. Scrimger, on behalf of Councillor Leeper, he asked about Route 55 and Route 88. Both appear to be sort of solid, successful routes. Can you just comment right now on why 55 and 88 are being proposed for reductions?
So on both of those routes, there are both reductions and improvements being made. On Route 55, just going through them in numerical order, on Route 55, we would be removing the section of the route west of Westgate Shopping Centre. So we'd continue to provide service to all the hospitals. The ridership on the section west of Westgate is very low right now, averaging 5 people per bus. And all of the destinations, all of the stops that route serves west of Westgate are also served by other routes. And we'll be happy to work with individual customers to find their best route under the new route structure. The other change on Route 55 is that we'd be adding Sunday service west of the General Hospital to on Main Street to Lee's Station across downtown and to the Royal and Civic sites. On Route 88, there's some small reductions in frequency happening at rush hours. I'm going to get the details right here. On Route 88, it's eastbound trips in the morning that will that now run every 10 minutes would run every 12 minutes, and eastbound trips in the afternoon that now run every 7 to 8 minutes would run every 10 minutes. Also on Saturdays, we would be increasing service on Route 88 so that it runs every 15 minutes at more times of the day. And all of these changes on Route 88 are done to follow current ridership patterns and ensure that there is plenty of room left for ridership to more than double without any overcrowding.
The concern on 88 was that it was pretty full at certain hours of the day now, so the email writer was concerned in that regard.
And there's no reductions on times that it's full. It's Route 88 is one of our busier routes on the system right now.
Chair, I'm just going to close with this statement. COVID has forced a number of our public services to be reduced. Ottawa Public Health, in their own words, have said they've had to pivot. Obviously, their focus is with COVID, but they've had to cut back some of their services because they don't have the resources or people power to provide that. In Parks and Recreation, we currently have 30 community centers closed across the city. We don't have the staff, we've pivoted, but also the demand is lower. And libraries, another board I sit on, libraries have had to offer abbreviated service, not the level of service that our public would like, but again, because of the challenges with COVID. So I've tried to promote and preach reductions in OC Transpo that don't impact service as best we can. And Mr. Mckinney and his team have done that very well up to this point. And I just think we have to confront the fact that demand is at record lows, and there's an expectation, not just from riders, but taxpayers, that we have to find that equilibrium. And I don't know what that is, because some very strong arguments can be made about retaining service, even when ridership levels are low. But there's also a very strong expectation from the public, generally from the public, that we will do what we can to offer an efficient service. So I know there's disagreement on how we get there, but we have to confront that this year, and we have to confront it with our riders as well. So I'll just end it there. And I do thank staff for the work that they've done up until now. And I do agree that if the criteria report can come out sooner, as has been requested, I think that will help as well to get more people engaged sooner. So thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brockington. Next up is Commissioner Olson, please, followed by Councillor McKinney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Mckinney, Mr. Scrivener, for the presentation. I just have a few questions. How many routes, what percentage of routes will not be affected by some kind of service reduction?
I'm afraid I don't have the answer to that right now, but we'll do the math and get back to you if we have it before the meeting closes.
Okay, thank you. And related slightly, do you have any idea what percentage of customers now using OC Transpo will be affected by any kind of service reduction?
It varies by route, of course. I don't have an overall number. It's as you can imagine, as you know, and as we've been talking about, ridership is quite a bit lower across the system than it would be normally. We'll see if we can get you a number back to characterize that level.
Okay, thank you. Have you heard from any employers about the impact of the proposed changes on their staff, their ability to get to work?
Not that I know of.
Okay, thank you. And are you actually, you heard this a couple of times with the delegations, are you actually making people walk further to a bus stop with some of the changes?
There's a very small number of bus stops which are served only by the connection routes that would be temporarily suspended. An example would be on Route 224, there is a bus stop at the corner of Shefford and Canatech that would require a one block extra walk to get over to the next nearest bus stop. I believe there's also one bus stop, possibly more than one, on Route 266, where we serve a street only with that route, where people would walk to the next nearest stop on Route 63 and 64. It's a very small number across the city.
And when you say one block, roughly what would be the distance?
Maybe 200 meters, maybe 300. So could be a 4 to 5 minute walk.
Okay. And I guess my final question, absent consultation on these service adjustments, what criteria or data did you use to decide on what the adjustments should be for each route?
It's primarily current ridership data. We have, obviously we have historical ridership data at every stop and on every trip and on every route. But we were looking at the data that we've been collecting most recently, especially the data collected during the fall and so far during the early part of 2021, making sure that none of these changes are on routes that are where ridership is very high, and that we're concentrating primarily on the routes, not only where ridership is low, but where ridership is very low.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, could I ask that data, the route-specific information, ridership information be shared with the commission?
Is that possible, Mr. Scrimgeour?
Sure, absolutely. Pat, you know this off the top, but just because I think the question is very important. How many trips a day and how many bus routes do we have? It puts it all in perspective.
Oh, you're testing my memory recall here, John.
Approximately, Pat. Don't be
approximately 150 bus routes. It all depends on what I define a bus route as, and approximately 8,200 trips a day that we run when we're at full service.
Chair, we'll get you the follow-up information to all members of the commission.
Okay. And to confirm, Commissioner Olson, that's what you're looking for, is all the data on all those trips?
No, just want to know for each route, the amount that the ridership has declined or increased.
So a report about 150 different routes.
Is that possible? I understand that the data is at hand, and I don't want for every different trip. Just for example, the 267. What has been the ridership on the 267 in the last 3 to 6 months? I'm not sure what the exact time.
Maybe, Mr. Scrimgeour, if you could touch base with the commissioner afterwards, maybe we can figure out exactly what you're looking for in the report and what can be produced.
Certainly. I do have the answer to the last question he asked, which is what is ridership. So if there's any particulars, I'm happy to read that off my notes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you again for your presentation and for answering my questions. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Councilor McKinney, followed by Councilor Tierney, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, staff, for the presentation today and for putting in some of the more pertinent routes so that we can actually see them. I really appreciate that added information. I want to just go back to revised Route 55. So am I clear then, if you live or you're coming from, or you live west of Westgate, you can no longer take the direct route to get to, say, the Ottawa Hospital, or even the Civic Hospital, really. Route 55 then is being truncated on the west side. Is that correct?
Route 55 is being shortened end at Westgate. That removes, I believe, 4 bus stops from the route. But what we've seen is that the ridership is very, very low on the section of the route west of Westgate. That's where it, obviously there's not very many stops along there because it runs along the highway. And from each of the stops that Route 55 serves, there's another way of getting to those major destinations, which people may be finding currently to be a faster or easier way for them. And that may be why they're not using Route 55 at the moment.
Is that like the 85? Is that?
Well, the 85 provides the continuous service along Carling, but Route 55 serves a stop at Woodruff and 417, where a lot of people might be preferring to use Iris Station and using the Transitway service to Tunney's Pasture and then taking their connection up to, for instance, the Civic Hospital, or the train, and then Route 45 if they're going to the General Hospital, and then Route 55 also serves a stop at 417 and Pinecrest, where there's many other alternatives feeding into Tunney's Pasture, and then finally it serves a stop at Bayshore Shopping Center.
Okay. Well, I have concerns about Route 55. I don't know the system as well on the west of Westgate, but I will look at that more closely then. Thank you. One of the slides that you showed us today said that ridership in 2021 so far has gone up from 18 to 27%. That's correct?
I'm sorry, there was a little audio either at my end or your end. I missed
Oh,
part of the
sorry.
question.
One of the slides that you showed us today said that ridership in 2021 has gone from 18% to 27% overall.
In January, when we were at the full effect of the provincial lockdown and stay-at-home order, ridership was at 18%. At the middle of March, we were at about 27%. So we'd seen quite large recovery during that month and a half, 2-month period.
And have you done an analysis on where that is? Like, here's my concern. I know that you already know I'm like very concerned about Route 6 and 7 that go through the downtown, that go on to Bank Street. Because I know, I mean, the last commissioner asked about, perspective, but, perspective is great if you're in your car and passing a bus. But it's certainly if you're, trying to get to shop or to daycare to pick up your kids or to work, those routes are the ones that serve people who have no other choice but to take transit. Because let's be honest, they probably wouldn't take Route 6 and 7 if they could. So I need to know, like, what is the analysis that you're using for ridership? Like, do you know? If we say, well, there's only 4 or 5 people on a trip, do we know who they are? Do we know where they're going? Do we know how essential that trip is to them? As opposed to maybe a connection bus where there is an alternative and perhaps it's not as onerous in terms of the delay for their bus to show up.
I can answer some of those questions, and please remind me if I don't answer all parts. I can say that on Route 6 is currently running at 27% of normal ridership in the morning, Route 7 at 23% of normal ridership in the morning, a little higher in the afternoon with Route 6 at 34% of normal ridership, Route 7 at 31% of normal ridership. And then on the weekends, Route 6 is running at 37% of normal and Route 7 at 40% of normal. So the frequency adjustments on those routes are just looking them up here. They're fairly contained. Routes 6 and 7 both, and the afternoon rush hour going south would run every 7 to 8 minutes rather than every 6 minutes. And northbound in the afternoon every 15 minutes rather than every 12. And then on Sunday afternoons, they would run every 15 minutes rather than every 12. So that's the specifics on 6 and 7. When we talk about who's still on the buses, we know, we know what stops they're getting on at. We know what stops they're getting off at. We don't know who they are. And on the question of, do we know how important the service is to them? I can say we know some of that implicitly. We can surmise that they're not office workers. They're not people who are commuting to travel to universities and colleges. And they are more likely to be people who are working in a service industry job. They are more likely to be people who do still have to travel, and therefore because the office workers aren't there, who have been the great majority of transit customers to and from downtown. They're therefore less likely to be traveling to or from downtown points. They're more likely to be traveling, to and from industrial, retail, service industry, and healthcare locations.
Okay. Quick question. Did you have those numbers just in your head? Or were you looking?
No,
Oh, okay.
I have screens
Holy
all
smokes.
around me here.
Okay, sorry. I was like, that was impressive, man. How much are we saving on the adjustments to routes 6 and 7? What's the savings for us?
I might have that over in another spreadsheet if you give me a few minutes.
Sure, you can send that to me after. It's
All
good
right.
to good to know, or you can say it out loud after. That's good to know. What do we do when the numbers increase on the routes? I mean, I brought up the case of, I know it's a personal case, but it's one that I know of with my kid and some of her friends from Fisher Park Middle School who, you know, come back into this part of the downtown after school. Going to school is always fine. Coming back is always crowded. The number 11 is always crowded. I know you said you looked at it before, but one of your folks gets back to me and says, you know, we're not putting on a bigger bus. The kids know they can't take it. They've just started walking because they know in the afternoons it's too crowded. They don't feel safe from the spread of COVID. So what do we do when we see these numbers? Because the same number of people will hopefully still take the bus. What do we do when we see those increases in the numbers on the buses? And more than say, like on a regular bus, actually they've done the math for me. They're smart, these kids. They said you can't have more than 21 people. You can't physically distance with more than 21 people on a normal bus. So what do we do when there's 35 and 42 on the buses where there's 21 today or less?
So Chair, I'd like to comment on that if I could, because it's a great question. And I think if anything's missed in today's dialogue is exactly this point here. And it speaks to, you know, that speaker that spoke about the 224, which said some really important things. Here's the beauty of the plan. And the credit goes to all of you and to City Council. Unlike other jurisdictions, and I can't find one, and I'm connected to all the major jurisdictions that run transit in North America, you did the most brilliant thing. You didn't cut transit service one bit. You didn't flinch. You took the long view. While others are rebuilding capacity and bringing back operators that they laid off and retraining them and recommissioning buses that have sat idle and hurting people all along, because to your point, Commissioner McKinney, we care about every one of them. Whether they're going to a low-income job, whether they're going to a federal government job, whether they're the essential workers that have been getting us through this pandemic, they're all important. And the beauty of your plan here is it is dynamic. And if ridership increases, because you haven't laid off operators, because you haven't parked the buses, we will ramp up the service. And the best thing that can happen for all of us is that ridership increases, and it will, by the way. We just bring it up as we go. And we have the delegated authority to adjust. And I can assure you, we don't want stranded people. Like I said during budget, let's not leave anybody behind. They're all essential for all of us for a bunch of different reasons. And I can connect with every single comment today. The plan that's before you will respond to those things, Councillor. So if ridership increases, we will redeploy spare buses. We have the resources, we can do that. But we're also looking at the bottom line. We heard loud and clear, many of the suburban councillors were talking about empty buses going through their communities. Those are the ones that we've reduced significantly. And we've given you a dynamic plan that enables you to throttle up and throttle down, manage the bottom line. And as you say, Councillor McKinney, you know, this is not about cutting those that are using the service. And so we've brought the balance to, there is a bit more inconvenience to some, there are parallel routes. And the credit goes to Pat and his team that have really come back, because the goal I gave them is how do we bring a plan that is dynamic, that doesn't hurt people, and that keeps the economy going, and we can respond as ridership comes back up.
1 minute left.
I appreciate that. And you know what, John, I have to say, I do appreciate you saying that you look out for all riders, because sometimes, you know, I'll focus on people who are, more marginalized, or, but it needs to be safe for everyone. Absolutely. And we want everyone to be able to take transit. Absolutely. So I do really appreciate that. that reminder. I guess for me, I'm still, and maybe, maybe I need to see this in the criteria report. I need to see, what is that number? What is, when do we determine that a route is oversubscribed during COVID? That it's oversubscribed, there are too many people on it. So we made, maybe it's the number 6 in the PM, that's 34%. Maybe it's the number 6 southbound in the PM, that's already at 34. Maybe it will, if it goes above 50, that's too many people on a bus during COVID. So I want to see that. I guess I'm asking, like, is that what we're going to see? Are we going to be able to? Are we going to be that flexible? And then, how do we bring those drivers back? I know it's being done through attrition, but we will need drivers when we're upping the service again.
So yes and no to your capacity issue. Again, other jurisdictions, remember, we're the first Canadian municipality to do mandatory mask, first Canadian municipality to do rear door boarding and so forth. And I can tell you, everybody opposed our mandatory mask policy. Do you know why we did that? Because OPH and ourselves took the long view. There will come a day when you can't socially distance in a bus or an LRV vehicle. That day is coming. And the mandatory mask is here for a while. We'll let the professionals tell us when you don't have to have it. But there will be situations, and other jurisdictions have gone to, they put the dots in the buses and they blocked off seats and they blocked off platforms. That's not working. That works when you're at 5-10% of ridership. It's not going to work when you're at 20, 25, 30, 35. And so, we were proactive in getting into the mandatory mask, the millions you're cleaning on enhanced cleaning, the shields you've approved on the buses. It's all part of that strategy. Because when we look to places overseas that are way ahead of us on the curve, somebody said we're scratching our head and we're not looking at the curves. We are looking at the curves. They're ahead of us on vaccination. They've had lockdown relief come off. That's why their ridership jumps up. But guess what? They're doing the exact same things we're doing. They were very proactive on some of these measures. So Councillor, I really enjoy these questions because this is the space we need to be in. And what we wanted to do is give you every off-ramp you could have so we don't box anybody in. Because I will say it, it's all riders, including that suburban summer student that needs to get to a job downtown that's stocking shelves at a grocery store for income. All of them are important. And yes, it'll be very dynamic and changing and fluid, but we are bringing the best of the best to this plan for you because we all want the same thing. A good mobile city, environmental sustainability, which transit gives you. We've got to manage the bottom line and bring that balance to it. And we are responding in every way we can to all those parameters, including the outcries of empty buses, which are generally people that don't need to go anywhere. That's the irony of it. But they forget those that need the bus, that are helping us get through COVID. You heard from the speakers, that person that takes the 224, she's not a government worker. She wants to get somewhere. I understand that.
Same with the 6 and 7. Chair, I know I'm out of time. Thank you, John, for that. I really do appreciate the back and forth. I will just say this: if there is any way of getting that criteria report out a bit early, I do think that when we're talking about public transit, the more we can do to engage the broader community, the better our decisions will be in the end. So, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Next up is Councillor Tierney, followed by Councillor Vice Chair Cloutier, please.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Yeah, it's I think you know how passionate I am about this bus, John. Even before getting elected, I fought to make sure it stayed. We've had these battles time and again. So it's very difficult to square this one right now. How many people are actually on average taking Route 224 right now? I guess that would be for Pat.
Just looking it up here. Right now, Route 224 specifically is carrying 15% of the number it would normally take, and that's an average of 3 customers on each trip.
Yeah, and it's literally
and almost every stop on that route is also served by Route 24, which continues to run every I believe it's every 15 minutes.
Right, right. It's literally at my back window. I see the 224. It was my go-to bus forever. So I do share a lot of the concerns I heard from our delegation that came out today. But on that, I want to get to how we see those numbers jump back up, because remember when we had train issues a couple years ago and that 224 was getting affected, they were overpacked. Like this is a very typically very full bus on a regular basis. But what it is there's a lot of, there is exceptions, but a majority, I would say 90% of the 224 former riders pre-COVID were government workers. And these are government workers that found it easy to be able to get on the bus and just go right, it used to go downtown, but go right to Blair, making the decisions to leave their cars at home. And this is my fear is if we take that a nice easy way to get to Blair out of the picture, we're going to see more cars and lose more ridership. Have we been working with the federal government to see whenabouts they determine they may come back? I know that it's a mug's game to try to predict, but I'm assuming we're talking with them on a regular basis, because I do hear a lot of people saying, yeah, I'll be hopping on the 224 when I don't have to do Zoom out of my home anymore so I can go to work. I just don't want to see us lose that opportunity.
The chair, the city manager is meeting with the most senior officials at the federal government we need that answer. Because we do not want to be caught flat-footed. If they return to work, we need to plan proactively. And again, we haven't shut down our service, so we can move very quickly. Same with the universities. We're setting up meetings with their executive team. We need to get that. You know, I know some universities are already signaled September, you're back in. Not full-time, but partial openings and things like that. So, but we will be able to respond. And as I've said to Councilor McKinney, we will, if we see ridership on routes increasing, and there will be some of these routes that will increase, we will throttle up the service, and we don't have to, that's the beauty of the delegated authority. I know there's pluses and minuses to it. I'm not going to come and hold a meeting to tell you I'm going to increase, you know, an extra trip on the 224 if I have to. Same with the 6. It'll be across the board, and that's my commitment to every councillor.
Great, John. And on that, so what you're saying is, let's say we see an uptick. I see a lot of people saying, hey, Tim, we're going back to work downtown again in our government offices. And in September, we don't have to wait for a seasonal change. You have the ability to be able to say, no problem, let's get that 224 back in play.
This is a dynamic plan, and we want to adjust. The chair was very clear with me in terms of his expectations about, let's make sure we continue to take care of everybody. We will adjust on the fly. And remember, it's on the operators and the vehicles, we have all those. We are still training staff because we go by budgeted hours. We don't go by FTEs. So it's not a resource issue. It's full throttle, and our focus is on ridership will return. Will it be 100%? Who knows by when? Vaccination support. You know, I even heard about that. You've seen us at your vaccination clinics. We're supporting the vaccine rollout and so forth. So we are committing to keeping it dynamic and moving through so we can adjust.
Yeah, and it's so unfortunate with this whole COVID crisis because this route would have evaporated in 2024. And forgive me, you'll have to tell me what month we'll have Montreal Road Station online. I don't know if Pat wants to answer when that is, but on that note, when are we going to start looking, because now it's spurring more conversations about, well, if 224 is going to be going for a short pause, when are we going to start talking about routes that connect to Montreal Road Station? And most likely that would be one of those routes that would disappear and it'd have a better path to the Montreal Road Station.
Pat?
Thanks, John. So, Mr. Chair, we've got route changes that we'll have to make for all of the stage 2 extensions. For those to the east, we'll really be working on it through next year, through 2022, talking to the councillors affected so that we can lock it down and start providing information during 2023 for the opening in 2024.
Okay, great. Yes, I really want to be a part of, making sure we connect with the community. It's really unfortunate. We were just a couple years away from that, but it is what it is. So again, and John, not to beat the drum too much again. So I have your commitment. If we see that federal government is coming back into play, where we're going to see lots more people back on the 224 like they used to, that want to leave their cars at home, that you can very quickly get that back online.
Ridership equals revenue, and we can add service. It's that straightforward.
Thank you. I appreciate that. On to a quick pivot over to there was a delegation that spoke about Route 12 and the splits and how it could affect Lester B. Pearson and Gloucester High School. That is very critical. I'm not sure if you remember some of the discussion around that. Can you remind us why Route 12 is changing and when it will go back to the way it should be?
So Route 12 and other routes along Montreal Road, such as 19, 20, 15, are all being changed because of the very large reconstruction of Montreal Road that's starting in just a few weeks. We need to move the bus routes out of the way as Montreal Road goes down to, a construction site with one lane going west only. We're moving routes to parallel streets, and we're diverting customers as much as we can, as much as it works for them, over to move the train for their trip from Blair or from Saint Laurent to downtown, rather than needing to drag them through or around the construction area. So we've worked with the Transportation Authority for the school boards to make sure that there are still the best connections possible to all those schools. There's a couple of new school route, just a different label coming on the buses starting in April, and Route 12 is being changed so that it'll take people directly into Saint Laurent Station so they can hop on a train to downtown, while at the same time we expand Route 15 so that it runs 7 days a week and continues to go downtown, though it will be slower because it has to go either through or around the construction sites. And then once that construction's over, we can put those routes back to the way they should be.
Great. And how long do you anticipate? And I know construction, scope creep and things slip all the time, but do we have a ballpark of when that construction will be complete?
I'll find out. I don't know whether it's, I just don't know. I know that Councillor Fleury knows, but I will have to check and get you an answer on that.
April 18th.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt.
When the construction ends, I'm sorry, that's what I'm going to find out.
The detour ends in 2022 spring is where we have it now.
Great. Thank you. Hey, I've got both you guys doing this. Is great. So thank you for that. I think that's the messaging people really have to know, that this is because of the construction aspect. It's not that we want to go making everyone's lives miserable, and also inform them when it's going to be complete. Just very much like, I'll be presenting to my community come September. If the numbers start going back up, 224 is the first thing I'll be placing a phone call to Pat and John about, because it is difficult for sure. Anyway, I want to thank staff and the chair. I look forward to the rest of the discussions today.
Hey, thank you, Councillor Tierney. Vice Chair Cloutier, followed by Commissioner Wright Gilbert and Councillor Kavanagh.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you very much, Chair. Puis je veux certainement remercier toutes les délégations qu'on a eues ce matin qui nous ont donné le contexte et l'importance du service d'Aussi Transpo, que ce soit Acorn ou Ottawa Transit Riders Users Group et les autres qui se sont présentés ce matin. I certainly also want to thank staff at Aussi Transpo, John and Pat and your colleagues and frontline workers in providing the service that is so important to our residents, and the planning that you need to do with respect to Montreal Road or other detours, and in navigating the effects of COVID. I appreciate the work you do very much. First, I want to just confirm the service changes recommended in today's report will have no impact on paratranspo customers. Is that correct? John or Pat?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And with respect to the temporary suspension of select peak service period routes and frequency reductions, what is the ridership level you will require in order to look at those numbers and look at those routes and reinstate them? Councillor Tierney just said, well, certainly we'll look for signals, and we're having discussions with the federal governments and educational institutions. But will you look for a certain date where they are returning, or will you look for ridership levels to reinstate those routes, to adjust those routes?
Mr. Mckinney may have more to say, but I would just say we have to keep watching. We have to watch for the upward trend to resume or to continue. We'll have to see where we are, you know, as spring goes on, as vaccinations become more common, as we get to the summer, once the universities decide, once the major employers decide, we'll have to see, and it might be different in some parts of the city than in others. At the moment, though, we're protected. You know, we've got a lot of capacity. We've got enough capacity remaining on these routes for ridership to more than double without overcrowding occurring. So we will have, though it could be quick in some parts of the world, they're seeing ridership growing very quickly once once restrictions come off. It'll still be work for us to do, but we'll watch and we'll see, and we'll have enough time to make the right decision.
Okay, thank you, Pat. And again, just to confirm, you won't be waiting for months and months and months of ridership data to make those service decisions. Is that correct? You'll be looking for a trend, or you'll be looking for?
Generally speaking, Mr. Chair, transit's been driven by numbers. Here's the thing that COVID has brought. For the first time ever, every single transit agency around the world is dealing with one common problem, and that's COVID. And what people like myself have been pushing is, you can look at all the numbers you want, it's going to come down to public sentiment. Does the public feel safe going back into the vehicles, whatever they are, and what have you done? And that's why we were the first again to get certified for the APTA cleaning standard, which, you know, I believe you were at the launch. We've kept the cleaning staff, we've done the masks. What we're seeing now is, forget about the old rules. It's going to be, what does return to work, return to normal, I can't stand that term, but whatever that is, and even with the federal government, are they going to hybrid model? Are they going to partial days? Universities, same thing. I don't think that will drive your decisions. I think your decisions will be driven by what the public perceives the safety factor is post-vaccination to get onto a crowded vehicle with a mask on. And so again, you're talking to the GM that has continually said, don't cut service. I knew this was coming. I think it's not going to be driven by numbers. That's just my prediction. It's going to be driven by your customers saying, for me to get onto a full train or a full bus, I want masks, I want cleaning standards, I want frequent service. And so again, we take the position of don't cut service. In April, I'm bringing you the criteria. I'm not coming with, hey, we should cut more service, because I don't think we're going to be able to respond quickly enough, even if there is a partial return. Because the customer is going to want, as Councilor Mckinney, as Councilor Tierney has said, how many people are on the bus? It's going to become irrelevant at some point, because you're not going to meet their expectations. And that's why there's a bunch of apps out there right now that can tell you how many people are sitting on a bus. We haven't invested in that because in due course, that'll be irrelevant. You won't be able to have enough vehicles to do the social distancing. That's why we didn't go with the dots on the platforms and in the vehicles. So your question is bang on. And our position will be, our recommendation is don't scale back. Don't do service cuts in 2021, 2022, 22. Do these adjustments, which addresses the concerns, and just keep taking the long view on it. You're financially in a good spot. You've got some money in the bank if the ridership doesn't bounce back to the level, but this team is not recommending drastic service cuts.
Thank you, Mr. Mckinney. And just to follow up on what you said, and I think I asked this question in the last Transit Commission meeting. You know, our communications approach to the public to reassure, to certainly some of the changes might come from members of the public, but our comms approach with respect to the safety of public transit, with respect to the proactive safety measures that we have taken, and thank you for those, will always be part of that, and getting people to feel comfortable with public transit, because as you've said, every transit operator in the country has had, in the world, I apologize, as facing the same issue. And so I will just say, I hope councillors' offices can be part of that messaging so that we can get people back on the bus, and so that we can be prepared to take the calls, and how we could proactively message this to OC Transpo users so that they can get back on the bus and the train and plan their schedules more accurately. And so I guess my last question is, I understand ridership is down, but the numbers reflect users who are essential workers, who have odd shifts. Sometimes by definition, essential workers work 24 hours a day, healthcare or other segments of our economy, and our services to our residences. And so I want to make sure, and just to get your assurance that that is always top of mind, those persons that are not in the middle of the day, but that are on the edge of the day, early morning or late at night. They'll need some flexibility. And as you get feedback from OC Transpo users with respect to those more odd hours, but that are very important for those workers that use it, essential workers, or by necessity, or whatever other circumstance that user finds themselves in. I just like your assurance that that will always be top of mind in the recommendations that you bring to this Transit Commission.
It will, Vice Chair. And in addition to that, in the April report, Pat has done some amazing work with economic development and Steve Willis's team and Stats Canada. You'll see who's riding the buses. It's actually, it's impressive in terms of the perspective. So, but absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Manconi and Pat and the team at OC Transpo, and thank you, Chair. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Next up, Commissioner Wright Gilbert, followed by Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to keep my questions brief, just because I unfortunately have to leave the meeting after my questions to deal with a family issue. I have some concerns with some of this plan, to be honest with you. Not about specific routes. I leave that to the individual councillors to advocate for the routes in their wards. But when it comes to the safety of our customers, especially women and vulnerable populations, I'm concerned that the reduction in frequency of routes in the evenings and the longer walks to stops, bus stops, is going to lead to a reduction in ridership, and for those who don't have any other options, it's going to lead them to being potentially unsafe. I'd like to know sort of what were the considerations with respect to a gender and equity lens, not to gazump my colleague Councillor Kavanagh, but what were the considerations that were given to gender equality when it comes to reducing these routes at night and longer walking distances?
So first of all, I'll say that the equity and inclusion lens guides everything we do. It's been incorporated by this commission into the service standards that we must follow. There is nothing more important that we do than to keep our customers safe. When it comes specifically to evenings, there are 2 routes which would have reductions in the evening. So that's 2 out of 140 bus routes. Those 2 routes are Route 39, which would run every half hour after 10 p.m., and Route 54, which would go to once an hour after 7 p.m. Route 54 is a small local route at Tunney's Pasture that connects the residential area north of Scott and east of Parkdale to Tunney's Pasture Station. Route 39 is the
connector bus from Blair Station.
Is the rapid route that runs from Blair Station to Place d'Orléans, Tunney's Pasture, Trim Station, and then down to Millennium Station. Those are the two routes out of all that would have an evening reduction.
Okay, so those two routes, I'm actually really familiar with those two routes, having worked at Tunney's Pasture for years, and actually being a rider of, or prior to the pandemic, of Route 39. So Route 39, you're right, it takes you directly from Blair Station, which is obviously the beginning of the LRT, or the end, depending on which end you're coming from. And it takes you, you're right, it's a connector route to the major transit stations where there are park and rides. And so, and then Route 54, you are right, it is a local bus. However, it's a local bus going from Tunney's Pasture, which is the end or the beginning of the LRT, depending on how you look at it, it's a local route. So I'm very familiar with both. My concern with, and I take your point that it's only 2 out of 140, but there are people that take those routes, and those customers are now going to have to wait an additional half an hour, possibly, if they miss their bus or the train doesn't get them there at the right interval. They're going to have to wait around in a transit station for potentially a half an hour, or have to walk home. And some people may choose to do that. My concern is that we are asking, essential workers, a lot of them, PSWs, nurses, they're women. And we're asking women to stand around for half an hour, potentially late at night. That's not safe. And so I would beg you to please reconsider the nighttime changes to these two routes. It cannot be such a cost savings that we could not reconsider. That is my plea. I am concerned about women and about vulnerable populations. The other point I wanted to make, there's actually two. Because we are reducing bus frequency, what are the chances that we can extend our transfer period? So if people are having to wait longer, it's possible that their transfer will expire. I know I've asked this question in the past, and the answer has usually been that it's a big rigmarole to do so, but I think it might be worth it in this case. So what do we need to do to extend the transfer period?
So we've done an analysis of what travel times would be. As you know, the transfer period already gets longer as you go into the evening and as we go into weekends under existing council policy. The current transfer windows of 90 minutes during the day going to 105 and then 120 are still going to accommodate substantially all customers who are making a continuous trip under the new schedules as they do today. If there's a recommendation to change fare policy, that's best handled through the budget process or through a legislative process, starting with a inquiry with the clerk's office.
Okay, so you say that the transfer period will substantially cover all customers who are making a continuous trip. That's assuming that the bus services are running on schedule, correct?
Oh, yes, that's correct. And we always are ready to refund double payments for anyone who's been caught out by a service failure.
Okay. There are a number of vaccination sites around the city. I assume that I hope there'll be more. Have you made sure that none of the cuts would affect trips to these vaccination sites for folks who do not have a car or another means to get there? Was that a consideration when you were making these adjustments to service?
Yes, that's a major part of our planning.
So there are no adjustments or cuts or whatever we're going to all agree or not agree to call it that would affect vaccination sites.
1 minute left.
We're making sure that there is still good reliable, frequent transit service available to all the vaccination sites that are on the primary transit network. There's there's other vaccination sites that have been selected, which we're supporting in other ways. But the primary ones that are on, like Nepean Sportsplex, right on the transitway, always will have good service. The YMCA, YWCA in Orleans, very close to the transitway network, and we're providing shuttle buses to take people from Place d'Orléans station over to the site.
But that didn't really answer my question directly. Did you ensure that none of the cuts would affect the vaccine? So were any routes cut that vaccination centers are currently on? Cut, adjusted, however we're going to wordsmith this.
There are frequency reductions on some routes which are on major corridors. There will remain good service to all vaccination sites that are on the transit network or on the primary transit network. And in addition, we have been, and we may still be increasing service where required at particular locations using some provincial funding that's coming through the vaccination program.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are my questions. I will now have to step away from the meeting.
Great, thank you, Commissioner. Next up is Councillor Kavanaugh, followed by Councillor Meehan.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you to my colleague for asking about about gender equity and that lens. I appreciate it. My questions are in relation to a couple of the routes. Route 11, I appreciate the extension that is being made on the east side of it. That's very helpful. Number 11 is a route I've talked about a lot. And I'm still hearing from residents about going to Bayshore. Right now it's every other trip, and they're still asking about every trip. Now the ridership of number 11 are seniors in condos and apartments along Richmond Road, etc. So they're not commuters. These are people getting to appointments and doing shopping and don't drive. That is the demographics. I'm sure Pat knows that. So has that been considered for the Bayshore side of it?
Oh, yes. There's no changes to that service. Just by way of information, Route 11 is currently running at 35% of normal levels in the morning rush hour, 56%, so high among all of our routes. In the midday, 41% in the afternoon, 44% in the evening. So overall, it's carrying just a little less than half of the number of customers it normally does. And that's the same on Saturdays when it's also at 45%. Sundays, it's carrying about 62%. So there's been, according to my notes here, there's no reductions at all, just the service enhancement on Route 11.
Yes, no, I understand it. They're actually still asking for, rather than every other bus going to Bayshore, to have every bus go to Bayshore, because they wait for that bus that goes to Bayshore. It's still very, very popular. It was a very popular move. So I'm just saying, and I know it seems odd to be talking about that when we're talking about other routes being cut back, but I think we're seeing the difference between commuter routes and routes that are workhorses for communities for getting around, which is what we want to see. I was concerned about Route 51, the Britannia cut, that dipsy doodle it makes down to the village and back, being every 30 minutes. And the concern is that you can tell me right now what the ridership is. I imagine it's low. But the concern I have is a reliability, and I think that's already been mentioned, that if people know it's going to be at that particular time, that's all the difference. And we've heard this from some of the presentations, is they need that information that it's actually going to come at that time, because 30 minutes could be an hour if they missed it because it didn't come at the time they expected. What was the number on the ridership there?
Oh, sorry. Route 51, the complete route is carrying 30% of its normal ridership in the morning, 32% of its normal ridership in the afternoon.
Okay. So, and the other concern is that when I look at low-income areas, 2651 Regina is on that route, and which is an OCH building. And I know you're going to say they'll just have to walk up to Richmond Road, but it is something that people rely on, the 16. So I'm just mentioning that that we keep that lens on too in terms of the customer base. So I appreciate it. Well, I think we're going to hear soon about another lockdown. I think there's going to be a news report about it. So we're going to be back at that. My concern is that that these changes are based on the fact that we're not getting the fare revenue, and that concerns me. So that we're reducing service because we're losing fare revenue, and it asks for the bigger question of how we look at this for the future about the reliance on fare revenue, because obviously that tends to drive everything, and that's my concern, because we're going to have ups and downs. We're going to have another down, we're going to have another up, but we have to provide service. We've heard from people about the need for, service for, and have that main link, and I appreciate that for most of the pandemic you've done that, and that has been very welcome. It's hard to argue about empty buses. People see that as an obvious thing to cut, but the service is important. But I just want to make sure we're not motivated from the reliance on the fare revenue.
Chair, great question. If that was the case, I would have cut service when I faced all the pressure early on. And again, you're one of the few large, you are the only large transit authority in North America that has not cut service. And they are feeling the pain for what they've cut. They're rebuilding stuff. If I was basing all this on the bottom line, I would have brought you cuts a long time ago. We are doing this across all lenses: equity, inclusion, bottom line, empty buses, concern for the environment, the balance of economic recovery, the lockdowns, all those things. So Councillor Kavanaugh, I think, I work, it's that whole, all the inputs into that process. And to, as I said, a budget to give you every exit lane as a council that you could have at your disposal to do the right thing for your communities.
Thank you. Oh, I was supposed to mention about 153, which hasn't changed, but we have a very high dependency on it. Again, senior routes. So these are routes that are in a category of their own of not commuters. They're people who are not using cars and getting around by bus. So just want to tell you how important they are and how we hear about it all the time. In terms of reliability, have we got any further information? I know I bug you about this all the time, on the app of when the buses are coming in.
50 seconds left.
Councillor, Chair, I have nothing new from 2 weeks ago, the last time.
Okay, well, I'll keep asking. Thank you. And just quickly, are we consulting with school boards? Because I heard about high schools being, might be affected in terms of the routes.
Yes, we're in consultation with all the major stakeholders.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. So next up, Councillor Meehan, please, followed by Councillor Kitts.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. And thank you for everybody for the important information. I'd like to start by saying thank you for being responsive to the needs in the south end of the city, particularly the new Route 110 from Barrhaven over to Canada. I really do appreciate that. Mr. Mckinney, if I can just go back to the comments you made in response to Councillor Brockington's question. You said that 2021 is looking really good. And that's because of other government payments and the money that's being saved with these route adjustments. Can you remind us, how much did we get from the feds and the province for this year?
I'm going to ask the clerk to bring up my slide again, please. Slide 1. I don't know if Councillor Meehan was here. It's not just because of the funding, it's also because of our expenditure control plan.
Yeah, okay. But how much, can you just tell me how much we got from the feds in the province?
It's right here on this slide here. Wendy helped prepare that. So if you go to 2020 COVID funding, you had $108.3 million, April 1st to December 31st. That covers everything but $3.6 million of the first month of the pandemic. That's in addition to the 12.8 million in operating savings that we did because of expenditure control. And we moved a bunch of capital projects into deferrals, which helps on cash flow also. Okay, but as Councillor Brockington was asking, do we have any commitment for any funds in that range for 2020? Wendy will be bringing a wholesome update at FEDCO, and we look to be in very good shape for 2021 when you combine our expenditure control plan, which we're still doing, the 5.5 million that you see here in front of you, and all the federal and provincial funding announcements. So she's bringing that plan to you. And in a nutshell, I was talking to her yesterday and to the city manager. We look very, very good for 2021. Having said that, we're being proactive because we don't know what's happening with the pandemic and the rollout of vaccinations. We are also banking you $11 million for 2022 if you need it. And on top of that, we're bringing you the criteria if you choose to direct staff to do further cuts. Okay, but again, we don't know what we're going to be getting from the feds. Wendy is bringing all that to you. Yes, she does. She's been working with the federal government and the province and the Treasurers Association. She'll be bringing, the treasurer will bring that update to you. Oh, so Wendy's got information that they're going to be anting up more money for us for our transit system? Wendy is doing the analysis on all that, and we'll be bringing a wholesome update to you and at FEDCO meeting. All I can share with you right now is that when we put all the pieces together, which I have not seen all of them, she's still working on them, the forecast for transit in 2021 looks to be that we will be in good shape, even with the reduced ridership that we are experiencing. Well, I mean, that is great news. I'm just wondering if we missed some funding announcement. That's normally we hear if they're planning on giving us funding for transit or homelessness or whatever. Did we miss something? And
Councillor Meehan, as staff have said repeatedly on this, the update on the finances will be made at FEDCO because it's not just transit. There's money involved in other parts of the city as well. So staff can't really answer these questions for you now, no matter how you phrase them. If you take them to FEDCO, you will get your answers. Okay, I'm gratified to hear that there is money on the table. So that was good. Well, I'll leave it at that then. We'll wait until FEDCO, but that's it for me. Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Kitts.
Thank you, Chair. I just have one quick question for Mr. Scrimgeour. Regarding the suspension of Route 235, based on a written submission we received, the report indicated that users would still be serviced by Route 35, but the resident that wrote in said that Route 35 Blair doesn't operate during the AM rush hour, and Route 35 Esprit doesn't operate during the PM peak, so identifying a service gap there. So I was just wondering if the schedule of Route 35 might be adjusted.
Yes, that's part of the plan. Route 35 will run both directions through both of those times, so that there's all the areas served by Route 35 continue to have service at all times.
Okay, great. That's wonderful news. That's it for me, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. So, Commission, the report recommendation is that the Transit Commission receive this report for information. Therefore, is the report received?
Received.
A dissent from me, Chair Catherine.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. And thank you, Mr. Manconi and Mr. Scrimgeour, for answering our questions and the presentation here. A lot of work went into this, so it's appreciated. Okay, now we can move right to adjournment. Vice Chair, did you want to move a motion to adjourn?
That the Transit Commission meeting of Wednesday, March 31st be adjourned.
Thank you. So our next meeting, which will be a regular meeting, will be April 21st. You've already heard some of the things that will be involved in that meeting. I'm looking forward to it, especially to see the reports about the performance for last year. And the media availability, I guess, will be at Eric. Is it 1:15 or 1:20?
Chair, I'm not aware of the media availability timing on my end.
Okay. All right. John, do you know, so we can tell everybody?
I don't, but let's make it 15 minutes from now, Chair, if we could.
Okay, sure. All right. So 1:15 for media avail if anybody wants to participate. Okay. Thank you all for being here today. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.